Chapter 492. Burp. After eating the roe owl, AOE let out a loud burp. Speaking of which, it's already so noisy, but this guy still hasn't woken up. After burping, he lowered his head and looked at Su Wei, who seemed to still be immersed in her dreams. The girl seemed to be having a sweet dream. Her face showed a sweet smile. Because she was put under a sleeping spell. A cold voice suddenly came from behind AOE, making AOE shiver and turn around vigilantly. But he only saw Su Shenxing leaning on the edge of the balcony's floor-to-ceiling window with an unfathomable look on his face. But his body was wrapped in colorful wires, and at the end of the wires were what looked like neon lights from billboards. As he moved, those lights also made a tinkling sound. What made AOE want to ridicule him the most was that this guy probably walked through someone else's clothes drying place, and now he was wearing a C-cup bra on his head, but he didn't seem to notice it at all. Don't try to pose like a superhero with such an embarrassing look. Then AOE suddenly remembered that the current situation seemed to be unfavorable to him. Obviously, this ferocious human rushed over to rescue his friend because she was attacked. And the current scene was that he was the only one in the room. AOE had turned into a dragon with his mouth wide open, looking like he was about to swallow someone. The human girl was also put under a sleeping spell. No matter how you look at it, I'm the murderer. AOE, who was feeling guilty, immediately began to look around, trying to sneak out of the room before the ferocious mortal could react. As a result, before he could find a way to escape, the human had already jumped from the balcony into the room. In the process, he smashed the floor-to-ceiling window, scattering glass shards all over the floor. To be honest, Su Shenxing's body was wrapped in wires, his head was full of glass shards, and his bra looked very funny. But AOE found that he couldn't laugh at all. Although he had long known that the mortal in front of him was strong, Su Shenxing didn't feel anything because he was just fooling around with him, although he almost beat the dragon's brain out. At this time, AOE really realized the horror of the other party. Even if he was still not serious, just a little bit of seriousness was enough to make him, a dragon, unable to move. This made him inexplicably horrified. Are you kidding me? When did the mortals become so strong? Why the hell is this human cultivating to be an immortal? This guy can casually pull an immortal down from heaven and beat them to the ground. As old Su approached step by step, AOE also felt the biting cold pressure. Even though he was standing still, the pressure made his face feel like it was being scraped by a cold wind. It stung. A moment later, he even found that the scales on his body had cracked. Of course, it wasn't because he was attacked, but because he was too nervous and began to shed his skin. You really haven't learned your lesson. The sneer on Su Shenxing's face disappeared completely, and he slowly raised his fist toward AOE. The dragon's ability to perceive danger made AOE's scalp tingle. He even felt that goosebumps were about to grow on his horns. He was so scared, but his body was so stiff that he couldn't move. The next moment, Su Shenxing swung his fist. But the fist didn't hit AOE. He swung empty air. Even so, AOE felt as if he could vaguely hear the screams of something. It was not a sound that could be explained by physics, but something closer to the fluctuation of the soul. It was not until this time that the pressure that made him unable to move suddenly disappeared. AOE fell to the floor with a thump, smashing a hole in the solid wood floor. His hard dragon horns even poked the 48-inch LCD TV hanging on the wall. But he couldn't care about these trivial things. Like a rabbit escaping from a hound, he gasped for breath. After a while, he regained his ability to move, turned back into his human form and got up from the floor. What the hell did you do? He stared at Su Shenxing, who had a calm face, and asked. But there was still a tremor in his voice, and it was no longer full of confidence like before. I reprocessed the things you didn't clean up. Su Shenxing replied with a smile. In simpler words, I made the soul of a guy who escaped from me disappear. Physics. Although he was very concerned about what the physics in that sentence meant, AOE's rationality told him that it was better not to delve into this matter. He sprawled on the ground and admitted defeat very quickly. Apart from that, you're also here to bring me back. If you've won. I admit defeat. Speaking of this, I do have something to tell you. The smile on Su Shenxing's face disappeared, and his expression became a little serious. But before that, with a whoosh, he teleported to the bedside and knocked Su Wei, who was about to wake up, unconscious again. I need to cast another hypnosis spell, physical. So what the hell is that, physics? Isn't this human woman your friend? Aoe shouted in his heart. Of course, due to old Su's abuse of power, he still didn't dare to ask. Originally, I wanted to let you stay here for a little longer because the effect of losing weight here is unexpectedly good, Su Shenxing said as he looked at Aoye's current figure. But your brother came to me again this morning. Although I suspect that his main purpose was to come to Jiangjin to see his old lover. He said something about you. Something about me? Aoe tried his best to ignore the main character's slander of Brother Long. He wanted to ask who Brother Long's old lover was, but instead he focused on the second half of the sentence, which seemed to be the subject of the sentence. Although it's a bit embarrassing. But since yesterday you are no longer the Dragon King. Su Shenxing continued. What? It means that your clergy has been removed. Only then did old Su put down his serious expression and said with a gloating expression, Wait a minute. Don't use a casual tone like today's cabbage only costs 35 cents to talk about such an important matter to me. Wasn't your previous clergy the Dragon King in the wishing pond outside the temple? Su Shenxing thought for 5 seconds and then decided to say a little more clearly, but that wishing pond was filled in by construction yesterday. What the hell? Chapter 493. Theoretically speaking, when a god's divine authority disappears, the god would also disappear. The best example would be in the past world line. Brother Dragon Aoe lost his divine authority as the Li Shui god due to the change of Li Shui's path and disappeared just like that. If the death of the modern river gods was half due to pollution, then the other half was due to the change of the water system. However, after Aoe heard the news from Su Shenxing for a few minutes, he still didn't see any signs of disappearing. Thus he thought, could it be that this guy is teasing me? Let me guess what you're thinking right now. This evil, terrifying bald mortal is teasing me. I'm not going that far. So you're still thinking about it? Tell me honestly which part of it you're thinking about. Su Shenxing once again showed an evil, terrifying smile. I'll punish you according to the description. For example, you're definitely going to pinch my head again. Let me tell you, the same trick won't work on a dragon. Secondly, before Aoe could finish, Su Shenxing drew a line across his neck with his hand. For example, I'll kill it directly. Coupled with the appearance of a bra, there was a strange persuasiveness. It was probably the feeling of, you can even do such a shameless thing, let alone kill a dragon. Sorry, I wasn't thinking about anything. After the other party admitted defeat, Su Shenxing didn't continue to pursue the matter. He just casually sat on the sofa in the bedroom, looked at the little fatty who was sitting, or kneeling on the floor and told him the ins and outs of the matter. This matter had to start from Brother Dragon who was not here. Perhaps Su Shenxing's intervention had caused Aoe's life trajectory to deviate. Or perhaps there were some minor changes in the Li River over the years that would not affect the main branch. In short, unlike most water gods, Aoe could leave the Li River under his jurisdiction and wander in the human world for a long time. Although the distance he could wander was related to the Li River was a river that ran through most of the territory of the Celestial Empire, so Aoe could almost travel across half of the Celestial Empire. It was also because of this that he was able to find Aoe in the small lake that had almost been cut off by humans. No matter how one looked at it, Aoe could be considered an elder. Naturally, he had some connections in the human world. Not long ago, during a trip, he learned from one of his sources that Aoe's small lake was about to be filled up. After entrusting a human friend who didn't know the truth to confirm the authenticity of this rumor, Aoe immediately began to make a move to stop this project. After all, Aoe was the only remaining member of Brother Long's kind, and he still valued this little brother. However, that small lake was originally a pond for a temple built by the lake. If the temple wanted to expand, it could only fill up the lake and create land. Although most modern temples were just for believers to burn incense and had nothing to do with supernatural forces, that temple was not one of them. It was the representative of a certain Buddhist sect that had been passed down since the Tang dynasty. Aoe's behavior was regarded as a provocation to the temple. In addition, he was unwilling to expose his divine nature. In the end, he was also regarded as a little monster who wanted to cause trouble in the human world. He almost followed in the footsteps of the White Lady and was suppressed under the stupa by those bald men. Since the simplest and most direct method did not work, he could only choose a slightly more troublesome method. If the divine right disappeared, the god would also disappear, but this relationship was not absolute. If a god wanted to live, It was not impossible as long as he could find another empty clergy and take it before his divine right disappeared. After the original clergy disappeared, he would continue to live as a god with another clergy. Aoi intended to use this method to find another clergy for the little fatty Aoi and take it. But this matter could not be known to Aoi. Gods were stronger than most living creatures, but they were also weaker than most living creatures. When a god's mind was shaken and even doubted himself and the meaning of his existence, even if the clergy still existed, it would disappear because of self-denial. This situation was not common for those who spent hundreds of years and finally ignited the divine fire to prove their Tao. After all, without a strong heart, it was estimated that it was impossible to reach this step. However, for the dragons who were born to be gods, and even individuals like Aoi who were directly incarnated as gods from a young age, great power did not give them the same strong heart. In some cases, just words could shake their hearts. This was why in the mythological era of Huaxia, there were always stories of dragons being slaughtered, and there were even tricks such as the skill of dragon slaying. Unlike Aoi, who had learned a painful lesson and gained a strong heart, he felt that his little brother Aoi would start to be shaken after hearing the news. If Aoi's heart was really strong, he would not have become a fat otaku. So he made the decision without Aoi's knowledge. In the beginning, the reason for Aoi to lose weight was quite nonsense. It could only fool Aoi, who failed the level 4 divine test. Not to mention that he was now a fat lizard. Even if Aoi was really fat one day with the physique of a god, he would not have 3 high cholesterol. If he wanted to be fat, so be it. In fact, now was not the best time to tell Aoi everything, but after Su Xinxing learned about what had happened previously through the spirit ghost, he felt that the little fatty Aoi's temperament was not as bad as Brother Dragon thought, so he simply told him everything. That is to say, Brother Emperor found a new clergy for me? That's why I didn't become a bubble? After listening to Su Xinxing's not very professional explanation, Aoi thought for a long time and finally figured out the cause and effect, and extracted the key points. Don't mess around. You are not the Little Mermaid. Judging from your body shape, even if you change, you will probably become fat. When that happens, the people in the super administrative office will probably spread a rumor that the oil tanker leaked. Su Xinxing sneered. Although he was very unhappy about this, Aoi felt that he was a god and should not be angry with mortals. So he tried to suppress his unhappy mood and continued to ask, "What clergy is it?" In the mythological era, the heavens had very strict restrictions on powerful creatures like the dragon race. Although they were born as gods, they were not given a clergy that matched their strength. Almost all the dragons were trapped by the carriage of the water gods or the heavens. The latter usually played the role of a miserable horse. Therefore, clergy suitable for the dragon race was actually very rare. It could be said that Aoi was really lucky to find a blank clergy that could be used in such a short time. About this, actually, I'm not sure. Su Xinxing scratched his face. He said that he found your father's clergy. Chapter 494. Aoi was stunned for a long time before he understood what Su Xinxing meant. His distant brother had found his father's lost priesthood, which should have been lost a long time ago. But theoretically speaking, that should be impossible. Aoi's father was once the dragon god in charge of the heavenly river, not the one in Journey to the West, but a real mighty river that led from the earth to the heavenly realm. After the collapse of Mount Buzhou, the heavenly pillar in the primordial age, this was one of the few channels that led directly to the heavenly realm. Because of this, Aoi's father was respected as a nobleman in the dragon clan. Even the dragon kings of the 4 seas were inferior to him. But more than 700 years ago, the strongest human cultivator, Lu Ji, led a group of top cultivators of that era and blew up the heavenly river, completely cutting off all connections between the heavenly realm and the human world. In order to keep the heavenly river flowing, Aoi's father held on for more than 3 years. Later, Aoi's mother came to help, but the couple died of exhaustion in the end. Their bones were buried in the dragon vein by Lu Ji to repair the boundary of the 9 provinces that had been damaged by years of war, so that the fortune of the human race could continue to flourish. Theoretically speaking, Aoi's father's priesthood would return to the heavenly realm after his death, but his body was buried in the dragon vein, the lifeline of the earth. The dragon vein was killed by the 10 shamans and transformed from the Oregon in Panga's body. After Panga died, his right eye turned into the sun god, Dong Huang Tai, and the Oregon fought against Dong Huang Tai, who brought light. The 10 shamans transformed from Panga's 10 fingers, killed the Oregon under Dong Huang Tai's order. Then, Dong Huang Tai gave the sacred mountain transformed from Panga's palm to the 10 shamans. The 10 shamans lived in seclusion on the mountain and were called the 10 shamans of Sacred Mountain. After the death of the Oregon, the candle flame in its mouth gave birth to the original dragon, the Oregon, and its resentment condensed into a single eye, the Oregon, who could interfere with day and night, yin and yang. As the Oregon, the origin of the dragon clan and the apex of the dragon clan, the dragon vein had a mysterious and powerful power. The priesthood of the heavenly river god was probably still in its decaying bones. Even in this era, human sorcerers had only discovered some earth veins that were branches of the dragon vein. The true location of the dragon vein was still a mystery. Even a god like the earth god could not trace the source of the earth veins and find the legendary dragon veins. Because of this, it was theoretically impossible to find the clergy of Ao Yi's father. So there was no need to continue to expose the bodies of the little fatty Ao Yi's parents, right? Unfortunately, although I have roughly guessed the location of the dragon vein, I'm not sure if I can escape unscathed after entering. Ao Li shook his head and said to the little fatty's disappointed eyes, I just collected the remaining clergy left by your uncle in the ruins of the heavenly stream and integrated them into its pseudo-clergy to temporarily save your life. Pseudo-clergy? Yes. Speaking of which, I have to thank this one. Ao Li pointed to Su Shenxing, who was yawning because he didn't know what the two were talking about. Me. After finding that both of them were looking at him, Su Shenxing scratched his face. Yes, isn't there a similar existence in your apartment? I used that existence to reluctantly create a pseudo-clergy. After hearing Ao Li's words, Su Shenxing remembered that Chihaya Fukuyama in his apartment was indeed not the same as the other gods. Her clergy was not complete. As the god of war, her name was with Su Shenxing. As for the water god and the earth god, most of her authority was left with Fusang. Her own divinity was also a mixture of two unrelated positions, so she had not obtained the real divine authority so far. Su Shenxing crossed his arms and thought for a moment, then asked with a serious face, then can I collect patent fees? Putting aside a certain money grubber who took every opportunity to accumulate wealth, the current situation was actually not that complicated. Although Ao Li successfully used the pseudo-clergy to hang on to the little fatty Ao Yi's life, this kind of thing was probably not very reliable. Perhaps one day the little fatty's burp would cause the pseudo-clergy to collapse, and the whole person would just dissipate. And if he wanted to complete the pseudo-clergy, he had to find the remaining half of the clergy. Not everyone was like Su Shenxing, who could need two different clergies together like plasticine and still be able to operate smoothly today. Wait, this doesn't seem to be within the scope of my job? At this point, Su Shenxing suddenly came to a realization and said with a fist, I can pay more. Ao Li took out a small palm-sized wallet, and there was the sound of coins clinking in it. Just a few coins won't buy it. Before old Su could finish his words, Ao Li opened the small wallet's button, and a pile of coins fell out with a clatter. And it was the kind of gold that was so dazzling that people couldn't open their eyes. All of them are genuine 24K gold coins. Ao Li smiled slightly. You know that I've lived for a long time, and if I'm not careful, a dynasty will pass. If I hoard coins, it's easy to not use them, so this thing is more valuable. Ahem, well, actually I don't have anything important to do recently. Su Shenxing put his right hand in front of his mouth and coughed dryly, then said with a smile, so it's not impossible for me to help a little. Ao Yi looked at all of this with his mouth agape, and suddenly felt that his brother's back had become towering. Look at how easily that terrifying human was convinced. Since it was already decided, there was no time to lose. Ao Li quickly prepared to go explore the dragon vein. By the way, when Su Shenxing went home to prepare, he found the fancy hat on his head, so he angrily beat up the two brothers. Other than Su Shenxing himself, he also brought along Mo Li, who was fired because he stole 80% of all the ice cream and coconut in the milk tea shop stock, so he also had nothing to do. This is Jiuchuan. Ao Li speculated that the location of the dragon vein was near the plateau, in a mountain ridge where there were few people. I found this place when I was researching the location of the dragon vein. If it was a place where birds didn't lay eggs, it was no wonder that no one had been able to find the dragon vein. Why did you guess that the dragon vein was in a place like this? Su Shenxing looked at the white snow that had begun to appear on the surrounding mountains and couldn't help but ask. The origin of Li Shui is about 20 kilometers away from here. Aoli replied, I didn't care about this at first, but then I realized that it was a bit strange. According to general geology, there shouldn't be a spring in that place. You know geology? Su Shenxing was shocked. I know a bit, Aoli said with a smug face. I've basically gone to all the geological universities in the country. This wasn't in the category of just knowing a bit. All in all, Brother Dragon didn't care about Su Shenxing's shocked expression and only continued to speak. In the gradually cold environment, white water vapor came out of his mouth. When I was doing an in-depth investigation along the spring, I found that there was actually an earth vein inside, and the density of the spirit energy inside was very strange. Plus, I've previously investigated the dragon vein through Kunlun's ancient books, so I vaguely felt that the dragon vein was probably nearby. After Aoyi's accident, I specifically came here to investigate and finally confirmed that it should be around here. As he walked, Aoli suddenly stopped. He looked around, then nodded and said to Su Shenxing, It's about here. Do you know how to use Earth Escape? Of course, don't worry, I'm very good at it. Su Shenxing immediately replied cheerfully, Earth Escape Physics. Su Shenxing touched the little girl's head and said, Don't think too much. Even if we assume that Pangu exists in a narrow sense, the world that Pangu created when he opened the sky is just Asia. Don't worry too much about it. In fact, Pangu might really exist. If I'm not mistaken, he didn't create the Asian continent but the entire Earth. Aoli said seriously, there are similar creation myths all over the world. The Earth is always transformed by the gods or carried on the back of some mythical animal gods. This almost indicates that the Earth, or the Earth itself, is probably a super life form that humans can't understand. No. Even if it was a planet-level super life form or a planet's consciousness, it wouldn't have any effect here. Su Shenxing wanted to tell Aoli that in his and Emoli's eyes, there was no difference between a continent and a planet. After all, the Great Demonic Realm was a giant existence that was built with countless planets in the world as its foundation. In comparison, even the Mid-Surda that built all the planets was considered weak. However, considering Brother Dragon's ability to accept this, Su Shenxing swallowed his words in the end. The dragon vein is the incarnation of the Oregon's body. Even if it's dead, it still has the ability to move on its own. If we make too much noise, it might alarm the dragon vein and cause it to move to another place. Aoli continued, so, compared to barging in and triggering the dragon vein, it's better not to sneak in and shoot. The one at the end isn't talking about the Tomb Raiders but the Japanese, right? Yes, as long as you understand. In the end, Su Shenxing, who was unable to convince Aoli, could only sit on the ground and lean against a large rock as he watched Aoli and Aoi perform the god dance. Emoli was leaning on him, half asleep from boredom. There wasn't even a cell phone signal in this damned place. He couldn't even make a call. Of course, Aoli and Aoi weren't really performing the god dance. According to Aoli, the Dragon Clan had some spells that could maximize their perception abilities. The god dance was just a preparation for casting the spell. It was impossible to find the dragon vein through perception, but Aoli didn't intend to find the dragon vein directly. According to historical records from Kunlun, humans had only opened the dragon vein a total of 3 times. The first was Gong Sun Qingyang during the primordial era. He used the power of the dragon vein to open up a pure land for humans in the primordial era. He also taught humans a lot of knowledge that only the dragon race knew, enlightening humans' wisdom. In the end, he rode the wind and disappeared without a trace. After he left, the dragon vein also disappeared. The second time was when the first emperor, Yingzheng, accidentally found the dragon vein and unified the world. However, Bai Qi killed 400,000 people in the Battle of Chongping, causing the dragon vein to be disturbed by the aura of death and disappear without a trace. It was because he had witnessed the incredible power of the dragon vein that the first emperor believed in the existence of the elixir of immortality. He even sent Su Fu to the east to search for the elixir. The last time humans opened the dragon vein was during Lu Ji's era, which was about 700 years ago. Putting 2 dragon corpses into the dragon vein and using the dragon vein's power to repair the boundary of the 9 regions was obviously not a small move. The alarmed dragon vein quickly disappeared and moved to another place. After that, Lu Ji tried to choose a few places where the dragon vein might appear. However, before he could excavate the dragon vein again, he died because of the suspicion of the emperor and Hu Weiyong's trap. Aoli, as a member of the dragon clan, had the advantage of being able to consult many big shots who had lived since ancient times. He found the 3 dragon veins in Gongsun Qingyang's era, Emperor Ingzheng's era and Lu Ji's era. He summarized the rules and made a rough guess that the dragon vein was located here. What he was doing now was to maximize the perception ability of the dragon clan to search for the legendary mark left by Lu Ji. Once he found it, he could basically confirm that this was indeed where the dragon vein was. However, for some unknown reason, before the 2 dragons finished their god dance, the mountain wall beside them collapsed and finally formed a violent landslide. Countless rolling stones rushed towards the people halfway up the mountain like a tidal wave. Chapter 496. For most people, the landslide would not cause any harm to this group of superhumans. However, if they were buried, it would be very troublesome to climb out and their clothes would most likely be dirty. Therefore, Su Xinxing simply picked up Mo Li by the waist, and then jumped lightly to the stratosphere to avoid the falling rocks. Brother Dragon, on the other hand, did not react in time and was buried with a clang. Sure enough, it's still a little out of control. Su Xinxing looked at the slightly curved ground under his feet and sighed. I was only going to jump 5 kilometers high. What? Mo Li, who had just woken up, was expressionless. Her ahogue swayed with the airflow caused by the jump and she responded with a lisp. Su Xinxing guessed that she was probably not fully awake yet. Even if Su Xinxing did not use protection, he was still affected by gravity. When they were about 50 kilometers above the ground, the power of the light jump was finally exhausted, and the 2 began to freefall. Su Xinxing stretched his legs and stomped 2 sonic booms in the thin air, but the speed of their fall did not slow down much. Then he looked at Mo Li in his arms and suddenly realized, that's right, don't I have the universal wishing machine here? Mo Li, create a wind and lift me up. Mr. Landlord. Mo Li raised her small face and looked up at Su Xinxing adorably. What's wrong? We ran out of snacks at home. Mo Li said seriously. You're actually making a request at a time like this. I didn't teach you to be this kind of person. Su Xinxing roared in his heart. Okay, I'll buy them. Now hurry up and help me. Yes, I understand. Mo Li nodded satisfactorily, and then made several layers of air cushions below to reduce the speed of Su Xinxing's fall. In fact, even if he did not do this, Su Xinxing and Mo Li would not have any problems falling from a height of 50 kilometers, although this unit of height was a bit strange. However, the damage caused by their fall was enough to cause a second landslide. Considering the fact that Su Xinxing and Jasmine's mysteriousness far exceeded that of this world, as well as the fact that Su Xinxing's power was currently out of control, there was a considerable possibility that he would ignore the common sense of physics in this world and cause an even more terrifying abnormal disaster. Although it was a little difficult to smash through the entire Earth, it was still quite possible to smash an entire mountain into nothingness, leaving only a crater behind. If such a thing really happened, it was estimated that more than half of the Celestial Empire's ecosystem would suffer a severe test. With old Su's character, it was impossible for him to do such a thing. With the air cushions made by Mo Li, these problems were of course easily solved. The point was not the air cushions, but the spell was cast by Mo Li. In the current Earth, the only person who could stop Su Xinxing from causing damage was the little girl. Similarly, if Mo Li went berserk, only Su Xinxing could stop him. Brother, I say, why didn't you remind us? When Su Xinxing landed lightly on the ground, the buried brother dragon Aoli crawled out from the pile of rocks. As a dragon, his reaction was theoretically faster than that of a human's. However, this place was really too close to the top of the mountain. Once the landslide happened, only Su Xinxing's well-trained nerves could react in time. Even Jasmine was still in a daze just now. Secondly, the flying method of the dragon race was also different from that of human cultivators. Humans would either merge with the escape light and turn into a long rainbow and fly up with a whoosh, or they would set up a flying sword and turn into a sword ray and fly up with a whoosh, or they would explode and turn into a super earthling and turn into a meteor and fly up with a whoosh. In short, the dragon race's characteristic was that they had a fast activation speed. However, the dragon race was different. The clouds follow the dragon and the wind follows the tiger was not just for show. In the human form, the dragon race basically flew slowly with clouds under their feet. Although the endurance and maximum speed, depending on the type of dragon, were much faster than humans, and the consumption of magical power was not much. The difference between the dragon race and the human race was like the difference between a Cherry QQ and a Ferrari. Of course, at this time, Aeoli was no longer in his human form. Instead, he was in a half-human half-dragon state. Simply put, he was probably like the Dragon King in the old version of Journey to the West. Fat Dragon Aoi pulled Aoli's tail and was dragged out from the ground by the latter. Brother Long and Brother Long both looked miserable, but they didn't really suffer any real injuries. Compared to this, I'm more interested in why the landslide happened. Su Shinxing ignored Aoli's sad eyes. After putting down Mo Li, who was hanging from his waist, he turned to look at the place where the landslide happened. Unlike the brother dragon who was directly buried alive, Su Shinxing who fell from the sky naturally had the leisure to look around. It was because of this that he saw some strange things. Hearing him say that, Aeoli immediately turned his head to look in that direction. Ordinary people would probably only be able to vaguely see something, but the advantage of the Dragon Clan was undoubtedly revealed at this moment. He saw a bunch of strange but lifelike human figures. Some of them were like Buddha sitting cross-legged on a lotus seat, but their bodies were covered with strange eyes. Those eyes looked lifeless at first glance, but if you looked closely they seemed to be staring at you. Some of them were like evil spirits suffering in the 18 levels of hell, turning themselves over and spitting out from their mouths. On the body that was spat out, the internal organs and blood vessels were clearly visible. Some of them had eyes like the tentacles of a snail protruding from their eye sockets. The long flesh-colored strips were disgusting like slugs, but they were covered with fine red threads that finally formed a snake array in the palm of their hand. Some of them had an expressionless face, but their right hand had a bloody mouth that was gnawing on the top of their skull. White brain matter seemed to be gurgling out from the hole in their skull. All of these were strange and inexplicable, as if they were figures that would only be worshipped by evil cults. That one came out from the collapse of the mountain. Aeoli was stunned. Su Shinxing nodded silently. What the hell is that? Aoi also saw those things clearly and suddenly his face became a little ugly. Obviously, unlike his expressionless brother, the little fat boy's psychological endurance was slightly weaker. I don't know. Su Shinxing should be the calmest one, and he casually replied, but it seems that this trip is not as boring as I thought. After saying that, he got up and walked towards the pile of human figures. Jasmine also immediately blindly followed after him. The dragon brothers looked at each other and naturally followed suit. Because the distance was not too far, the group soon arrived at the pile of human figures. From afar, the already strange and mysterious human figures were even more creepy when seen up close. Su Shinxing glanced at them, and after finding nothing special in these human figures, he quickly walked to a hole in the mountain due to the collapse. These human figures fell out from that hole. Inside was a winding cave. Although there were traces of artificial excavation, most of it seemed to be formed naturally. After pressing a fingerprint on the stone wall, Su Shinxing casually chose a path and walked. The path in the cave was not particularly narrow, but at most it could only allow 2 people to pass side by side, and some narrow places could only allow 1 person to walk through with a bent back. The top of the cave was embedded with shining luminous pearls, which made the cave a little dim, but at least it was not pitch black. Su Shinxing intended to take a luminous pearl out to solve the current economic crisis of the Sakura apartment, but Aeoli found that these luminous pearls were not real pearls, but stone pearls with a certain affinity to spiritual energy. Through some methods they absorbed the spiritual energy in the cave, which made them emit a weak light. Once they left this cave they would soon become ordinary stones. This dispelled Su Shinxing's idea. But the most depressing thing in this cave was not the dim and narrow cave, but the strange human figures that they would encounter from time to time. Under the faint light of the luminous pearls, those stone-carved human figures seemed to come alive, which made people feel a chill down their spine. Not long after, Su Shinxing, who was walking blindly, once again saw the fingerprints he left behind. It's a natural Chiman Duanjia. Aeoli, who was following behind him, said softly with a sullen face, I paid a little attention just now, and the fork we passed by coincides with the Z-way number. If I'm not wrong, this should be the Minor Celestial Coordinate Central Wall Formation evolved from the Great Celestial Stars Formation. Brother, wait a moment, let me break this maze. Su Shinxing looked at Aeoli, whose expression was unreadable, but always gave people a sense of excitement. After thinking for a moment, he gave up his method of walking straight with his eyes closed and bumping all the way, and slowly waited for the other party to break this Chimenduanjia. The reason was simple, because it felt more adventurous this way. Just as Molly was playing with the little lion statue she had gotten from God knows where, Su Shenxing was about to fall asleep from waiting, and Aoe had already fallen asleep. Aoe finally broke through the array and now had a satisfied look on his face. I just got some hints from the Chimenduanjia algorithm. In fact, there's no way to directly find the destination in this cave. We need to find a stone door first. He explained to the yawning Su Shenxing and the others. Originally, it seems that we need to break some mechanism to open the stone door, but the mortal mechanism is no problem for us. At most, we can just smash the door. Molly, put that thing back, we need to go. Su Shenxing, who always felt that it was a big project, scratched his head and was a little impatient. Thus, under the dumbfounded gazes of the three men, Jasmine ran to a corner and opened a stone door with a click. Then she placed the stone lion statue in her hand next to a huge bronze door behind the stone door. She quickly ran back and closed the stone door. Landlord, I'm done. Since you found it, you should have said so earlier. Why did we spend so much effort on this? Chapter 497. After passing through the stone door, they saw the copper door embedded in the stone wall. The pattern on the door handle was not the usual pepper pattern, but a few human figures that seemed to be twisted in pain. The copper door was engraved with fine and exquisite patterns, but if one looked closely, they would find that the patterns on the frame were like pictures of suffering in hell. It was a pattern of many small people less than a centimeter long suffering various punishments, or their bodies had mutated and twisted. So the aesthetic of the stone statues and the creator of this door is too bad. Su Shenxing could not help but complain. Even with his vast knowledge, he still felt displeased when he saw those artifacts. Among the many other worlds, the only ones that would use such distorted objects as totems were those cults that worshipped evil gods who loved bloodshed and were known for their cruelty and brutality. By the way, Su Shenxing had killed at least one of these evil gods. Compared to worrying about the aesthetic of the creator, I'm more concerned about what it means for this thing to appear here. Aoe, who obviously knew more about this aspect, focused on something completely different from Su Shenxing. After looking at the copper door, he was not in a hurry to open it. Instead, he looked around. The cave was about the size of 2 basketball courts. The ceiling of the cave was very high. Standing on the ground, one could only vaguely see the ends of a few stalactites hanging down from the ceiling. The luminous pearls embedded in the ceiling of the stone path outside were now embedded in the surrounding walls, and they were deliberately made to look like torches. The ground was engraved with many intersecting small channels about 2 fingers wide, and there seemed to be water flowing in them. It's mercury. The little fatty Aoe dipped his finger and licked it, then said, "Aren't you afraid of being poisoned by this thing?" Old Su asked curiously. "It's just a little bit fine. Before I changed it into a wishing well, there was all kinds of garbage. I've been drinking water all this time, but I'm still alive now." Aoe did not seem to care at all. "Because it's just garbage, right? If you have the ability, you can go and steal the chemical waste liquid all the time. It's better to say that this space is full of mercury vapor. If it weren't for the fact that none of us are ordinary people, I'm afraid we would have been poisoned," Aoe added. "So, why did the person who built this room put this thing on the ground?" Su Shenxing stomped his foot, but he did not control his strength and stepped on the granite ground, creating a pit. The mercury gradually gathered in the pit. Could it be that Emperor Qin's fans wanted to imitate his actions of using mercury to create rivers and lakes in Emperor Qin's mausoleum, but they didn't have the money, so they made a mini version? So those crooked figures are actually the inferior version of the terracotta soldiers? Aoe sneered and continued Old Su's words. Su Shenxing could not help but be a little surprised. Could this be the mark left by Lu Ji that you mentioned before? Lu Ji learned from the Liujia heavenly book in his life. It belongs to the orthodox Taoist Songjin sect. It belongs to the same category as the Song of the Righteous Path. Aoe shook his head. Although he used to be the sworn enemy of our dragon clan, he is indeed a righteous genius with a broad mind. He would never use such evil sorcery. It seemed that this guy held Lu Ji in high regard. But this is also considered a wilderness. Let alone some strange religion, even bandits would probably starve to death if they set up a camp here. However, the other party made such a big project here for the ancient people. Then there's only one possibility that I can think of. Su Shenxing touched his chin and speculated. Before us, someone had already been here and found the dragon vein here. Aoli was silent, but judging from his expression, Su Shenxing had hit the nail on the head. After discovering this, Aoli was quite conflicted. It would be fine if the dragon vein was slightly used by some strange organization, but he was afraid that the evil sect did not know anything and startled the dragon vein. That would be troublesome. With what Aoli had learned, he was afraid that there was no way to find the dragon vein again in a short time. He shook his head and looked determined. Forget it. In short, all the answers should be behind that door. After saying that, he took a deep breath and put his hands on the bronze door. With a sizzling sound, the bronze door was like a hot iron plate. When Aoli put his hands on it, a burst of white smoke came out. Humph, this evil sect actually did this to the door. However, Aoli was a dragon after all. This kind of temperature could not cause too much harm to him. He snorted and used his hands to push the bronze door open, ignoring the high temperature that could turn a pig's foot into a grilled pig's foot. The next moment, a slightly stale air rushed out from inside. Then what appeared in front of them was a river that seemed to be alive. It meandered and wandered in the dark tunnel, stretching its limbs. On the stone walls on both sides of the tunnel, there were many crystal-like clusters. It was not wrong to think that the whole tunnel was made of crystals. If Qin Xingyan was here, he would definitely be very surprised. These crystal clusters were very rare spirit stones in the cultivation world. And the value of spirit stones was even more obvious. When the Abbey Dean of the Bailu Temple sent her to the moon for tutoring, he only used about half a kilogram of spirit stones. Aoli reached out and scooped a piece of water from the river. The water in his hand was like jelly, and it still maintained its basic shape. It's liquid or even semi-solid spiritual energy. After playing with it for a while, Aoli came to this conclusion. It's too thick. I'm afraid that ordinary people will die when they touch it. It was worth mentioning that spirit stones were not solid spiritual energy, but a byproduct of spiritual energy produced when highly concentrated spiritual energy came in contact with some stones that were close to spiritual energy. Although spiritual energy was a good thing, although it was even more intangible than air, it was indeed closely related to human life. However, a good thing did not mean that it was harmless. Humans could not live without oxygen, but if they were in a pure oxygen environment, it would not take long for them to die from oxygen poisoning. The same was true for spiritual energy. Ordinary spiritual energy was beneficial to humans, but when it was concentrated to a certain extent, it was not something that humans could bear. So, this is the legendary dragon vein? Su Shenxing blinked and asked in confusion. I'm afraid so. Aoli hesitated for a moment, and then plunged into the suspended river of spiritual energy that occupied more than 90% of the tunnel space. Aoi, who had not spoken much, also went in without any hesitation. Su Shenxing and Aoli looked at each other. Aoli immediately hugged Su Shenxing's arm, and then the two stepped into the tunnel together. Just as Su Shenxing thought, the feeling of entering the dragon vein was similar to jumping into a river, but the spiritual energy was much thicker and thicker than real water. Even the Guinness World Record holder for holding his breath underwater could only hold for about a minute. Fortunately, Su Shenxing no longer needed to breathe, otherwise he would not be able to hold his breath in here. Aoli was responsible for hanging on Su Shenxing's arm and blowing bubbles. At first, everyone followed common sense and swam in the dragon vein river. However, Su Shenxing soon found that walking was faster than swimming, so they changed to walking. For old Su, it was like walking on a planet where the gravity was slightly weaker, but the air pressure was far stronger than Earth's. After experiencing hundreds and thousands of worlds, this kind of environment was not unfamiliar to him. Su Shenxing and the others aside, after a little while the dragon brother finally adapted to the current environment. Xiaoyi, you're walking too fast, slow down. Not long after, Aoli, who was walking in the front, was overtaken by Aoi behind him. Interestingly, even in the liquid spiritual energy, the sound of talking could be transmitted to other people's ears, and the speed of transmission might be faster than in the air. I don't know, Aoi did not stop walking, he just clutched his chest and panted rapidly. Every time he panted he would inhale a large amount of liquid spiritual energy, but he did not care about it at all. His face showed a strange flush of excitement, and his eyes stared at the other end of the tunnel without blinking. My heart is beating non-stop, My priesthood is jumping in joy in my Zifu. The dragon ball also seems to be resonating with something, making a deafening buzzing sound. Something is in front. He seemed to have completely fallen into that strange state, stumbling forward quickly. Could it be? Aoli's eyes showed a look of disbelief, but he quickly followed. Only Su Shenxing and Emoli were still slowly catching up from behind. In the tunnel that was full of colorful lights because of the river of spiritual energy, Aoli, who was running desperately, finally stopped. In the tunnel in front of him stood two creatures that were already distorted to the point that they did not look like humans. No, rather than calling them creatures, it was more appropriate to call them dead things. They were like zombies in doomsday movies. One of them was a man, and it could be vaguely seen from his face that half of the skin was peeled off, that he was once a handsome man. The other one's appearance could not even be recognized. It could only be barely recognized from the body shape that it was a woman. Even if she turned into a zombie, her body shape was still graceful. But at this moment, these two people had become disgusting corpses, and could only stagger back and forth in this dark tunnel. Father, Mother, Aoi knelt on the ground and muttered to himself with lifeless eyes. It's really the Sky River Dragon King. How is it possible? Aoi also stopped a few meters behind Aoi and looked at the two corpses that were still moving after 700 years in astonishment. Are those the parents of Fat Dragon? Su Shenxing asked. This is different from what we agreed on? Didn't you say that they were already corpses? Aren't they corpses? Aoli's forehead seemed to have something like cold sweat that merged into the long river of spiritual energy. The expression on his face became inexplicably complicated. I was wondering why the unknown cult built that kind of thing on the dragon vein, but the world didn't seem to be affected. Now it seems that it was because of a freak combination of factors that the ritual turned the dragon vein into a place for refining corpses, causing the Sky River Dragon King and his wife to become incomplete zombies. This prevented the other party from using the dragon vein to implement some kind of ambition. In the eyes of several people, the thing suspected to be the corpse of the Sky River Dragon King rubbed something in his hand, then raised his unrecognizable face and looked at the top of the cave with the dry eye sockets that had no eyeballs. Then he staggered a few steps forward and repeated his action just now. Is that an instinctive action before death? Su Shenxing asked curiously. No, it should be some kind of strong will that made him continue to do this even after death. Aoi was silent for a moment before replying. Although the thing in his hand is very worn out, there is no doubt that it is a jade slip used for communication. Is it something like a mobile phone? Su Shenxing asked. No, it's something like a dog whistle that can summon White Drake to deliver letters. It's just that the dragon vein is isolated from the world. Even White Drake's token jade slip can't send messages. It's a suicide note. At this time Aoi, who was kneeling on the ground with his head lowered, whispered. What? Su Shenxing couldn't figure it out for a while. It's the suicide note my parents sent me before they died. Even if they are dead, they are still afraid that the letter won't be sent out and they won't be able to see me for the last time. Aoi raised his head. His eyes were wide open and his dragon teeth, which had already become jagged, creaked. The expression on his face was distorted, full of hatred and madness. In the suicide note, they also advised me to be kind to humans and to believe in them. But it's these humans who they regarded as the future of the world, who not only killed my parents and destroyed my clan, but even after my parents died, they couldn't rest in peace and became like this. The Roe Owl is right. Humans have turned the once beautiful world into a mess. Look at what the human world has become because of the scourge of humans. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth is scarce, and countless creatures have been hunted to extinction. The monsters can only hide in the deep mountains and forests that are getting smaller and smaller. But even so, they can't escape from the hands of humans, because there are poisons and garbage left by humans everywhere. Humans are too despicable, there's no need for them to exist. He roared. Then he took a deep sip of water and said slowly, That's right. I want to change this world. Brother Long, your cousin is possessed. In the face of Su Shenxing's understatement, Aoi was silent. If this kind of dragon zombie runs out, it will definitely cause a lot of damage. If you can't do it, let me clean it up. Ignoring Aoi, who suddenly acted up, Su Shenxing twisted his neck and walked toward the two dragon corpses. I won't let you do this. Aoi roared at Su Shenxing. Shao Yi, stop. Brother Long tried to stop Aoi. But it was useless. Aoi took a deep look at Aoi. It wasn't clear if he was apologizing or disappointed that his brother would be so biased towards humans. He twisted his body and turned into a giant dragon that was dozens of meters long. He stirred up wind and waves and rolled up the two dragon zombies to rush out of the dragon vein. Su Shenxing snorted coldly and threw out a punch. But at this moment, most of the power of the punch was blocked by Brother Long's flying body. Aoi was hit on the spot and vomited blood and fell to the ground, dying. The aftermath of the punch still hit the giant dragon that Aoi transformed into. Although it couldn't be seen clearly because of the distance and the stone wall, the female dragon corpse had already been blown into powder, and Aoi also let out a sorrowful cry. The next moment the dragon vein was broken, and a large amount of liquid spiritual energy gushed out from the breach. It looked like a monstrous flood was generated out of thin air on a desolate mountain. When Su Shenxing stepped out to chase after Aoi, Aoi hugged his foot tightly. Brother, cough, the dragon vein has been disturbed, I'm afraid. I'm afraid it will move soon. He coughed up blood and panted heavily. But now, the spiritual energy has been exhausted. If it is allowed to move like this, the dragon vein will eventually become extremely weak and the world will definitely be in great trouble. It's easy to solve man-made disasters, but it's hard to prevent natural disasters. Even Su Shenxing didn't know how to protect the lives of the creatures on the Earth's crust under such circumstances. Although it would only take a moment to chase after Aoi, the speed of the dragon vein's movement was unknown. Who knows if they would miss the best time to repair it? After weighing the pros and cons, Su Shenxing could only resentfully give up on chasing after Aoi. Emily, repair that breach. Wait, what are you looking at? Without waiting for Emily's reply, Su Shenxing turned around and found that the little girl had unknowingly run to a place a little further away. She was squatting at a corner and seemed to be looking at something on the wall. This is... Su Shenxing dragged the dying Brother Long over. After seeing what Emily was looking at, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. After the dragon vein was repaired and the transfer was confirmed, it rained heavily for 3 days in a row. My house is already crowded enough, why are you still coming? Su Shenxing opened the door and found the Earth Loli wearing a yellow raincoat standing outside Sakura apartment. Nonsense, this rain is too strange. My house is already flooded. If I don't come here, am I supposed to sleep in the park? The Earth Loli pouted and complained, what did you do when you went out? Why did the rain start to fall as soon as you came back? It seems that the Earth Loli's control over everything on the Earth's surface wasn't just for show. She actually knew the date Su Shenxing left Jiangjin and returned. Although Su Shenxing's characteristic of not being able to be monitored made him very eye-catching in the eyes of certain people, just like Dehe. Other than the Earth Loli, the soul of the previous Earth God who originally lived in the Earth Mansion also came over. When he followed Su Shenxing to the living room, he met the eyes of Brother Long, who was wearing bandages. However, the grudges between the two of them had long changed over the course of 1,000 years. They only nodded at each other and then looked away. Let me tell you, this is definitely a sign that there's something wrong, Yu Jingjing muttered to Asahi Sakurakanji, who was resting at home because his shop was flooded and temporarily unable to work. If there's nothing wrong, why would they look away at each other so tacitly? Asahi Sakurakanji could only smile bitterly. Hey, when will the rain stop? I want to go out for a walk. The dog girl circled around Chihaya Fukuyama, making Chihaya Fukuyama dizzy. Qin Xingyan vigilantly looked at Aoi, who looked like he was seriously injured. Because old Su told him that this guy was an accomplice in causing the abnormal weather. Song Yu, on the other hand, was no different from usual. He brought Chiketsu to the kitchen to make desserts. Emily also followed in, but compared to making desserts, she seemed more interested in tasting the desserts. Dehe seemed to have been short-circuiting due to the overly humid weather recently. She was now lying down and resting. Although it felt useless to let a robot rest. So, what the hell happened? After finding a place to sit down, the Earth God Loli asked again. Su Shenxing glanced at Aoi and motioned for him to explain the cause and effect of the incident. Aoi could only smile bitterly and tell the Earth God Loli what happened. But it's just a little dragon, it can't possibly cause a nationwide rainstorm, right? This is too abnormal. Although it was not difficult for most dragons to summon rain, and it was even somewhat instinctive, there was a limit to the range of a single dragon's rainfall. This kind of rainfall that directly affected the entire country was theoretically impossible. In fact, even now, there were a group of meteorologists all over the world who could not understand the current weather of the Celestial Empire. They were so worried that they were about to go bald. Normal dragons can't do this, but there's an exception. At this time, Aoli said, if it's the dragon god Sky River Dragon King who controls that heavenly river stream, he can do this. Sky River Dragon King. The strongest of the dragons? But if I remember correctly, Sky River Dragon King died 700 years ago. After that, the heavenly river stream stopped flowing, and the divine title of Sky River Dragon King no longer exists in this world. The earth god Loli was indeed a fake Loli of unknown age. She was very familiar with the past that ordinary people did not know. The divine title of Sky River Dragon King has already been taken by Xiaoi. Aoli shook his head. The reason for so many days of heavy rain is probably because Aoi wants to replicate the Great Flood at the end of the Primordial Age to attack the humans. The Great Flood. Su Shenxing scratched his chin thoughtfully. Of course, if I'm not wrong, there's another possibility. Aoi was silent for a moment, then continued, no, it should be said that Aoi wants to kill two birds with one stone. He wants to dig up the heavenly river again. Aoi stood in the clouds. At this time he was no longer chubby. Setting off 3 days of heavy rain consumed a lot of his blood, sweat and magic, so much so that he was 3 times thinner. But he did not regret it. After locking his father, who had lost his mind, in his current hiding place, he once again set up a magic cloud, intending to carry out the last step of digging up the heavenly river again. As long as the heavenly river could appear again, then his divine title would have something to rely on. Even if there was another month of heavy rain, he would not have to work so hard. Brother. Aoli is there, he will definitely guess this. Even though he did not know his brother for long, Aoi still admired Aoli very much. Naturally, he would not think that Aoli did not know his purpose. But even if he knew, it did not matter. They must think that I will dig up the heavenly river again at the ruins of the heavenly river, Aoi muttered in his heart. In theory, without the ruins of the heavenly river as a base starting point or even a reference, the success rate of digging up the heavenly river was basically zero. But this was not the case. In fact, Aoi was very clear that his father was not a short-sighted person. Before he was killed by Lu Ji, he had left backup base points of the heavenly river in several places in the country. And the one Aoi chose now was the base point in his hometown, Chong Lake. This place carried his childhood and past. It was an extremely important place for him. Although the effect of the base point was a little worse than the ruins of the heavenly river, it was enough for Aoi. Looking down from the sky, it was easy to see that the surroundings of Chong Lake were basically flooded. The place where the ground should have been was yellow everywhere. The terrain of Chong Lake was not high. After 3 days of heavy rain, there were already signs of flooding in many places. It was only a matter of time before a flood occurred. Is there a mudslide over there? Looking as far as he could, Aoi found that the mountain he used to play on was a little lower. A few houses in the village below seemed to have been affected by the mudslide. But the right hand seemed to be refined by the 9th heaven. The dragon teeth that could break steel and iron could not even leave a bite mark on that arm. Sorry, I don't intend to bet my future on this arm, so don't waste your time, Su Shenxing said coldly. The next moment he held the dragon zombie's longest canine tooth and pressed its head into the muddy water with a gentle twist. No matter how the dragon zombie struggled, it did not move at all. Emily, take this little guy away. After correcting his memory, put him in the orphanage. Oh, so the girl snapped her fingers, and her figure disappeared with the boy who had not yet recovered from the shock. After that, Su Shenxing did not care about the dragon zombie. He just looked coldly at Aoi, who was not far away. I remember 3 days ago you said that you wanted to change the world, right? Su Shenxing continued to ask coldly. So all that you saw was the result of you wanting to change the world? Aoi was silent. I also hate human beings. Su Shenxing continued. Human beings are treacherous, short-sighted, unable to distinguish good from bad, ignorant, greedy, and some of them are even disgustingly selfish. But even so, I will not deny the value of human existence. I will still keep my promise to others and protect human beings. If the change you speak of is to exterminate human beings, then from now on I will also regard you as an enemy, and then, The next moment, a killing intent that was enough to make the world tremble broke out. I will kill you. Even if the other party did not make a move, the killing intent of the other party made Aoe feel that his whole body was tightly gripped by an invisible big hand. As long as his will was slightly relaxed, he would immediately be crushed into a ball of minced meat. I will not admit defeat. He gritted his teeth and roared against Su Shenxing's killing intent. I can't save my parents, but at least I will not let their death be in vain. Human beings deserve more than death. When Su Shenxing's expression became more serious and seemed to be about to make a move, Aoe also flew over on a cloud. Wait a minute. He shouted at Aoe. There is another reason for the death of the Sky River Dragon King and his wife. Aoe, don't be impulsive. What? Aoe was stunned. Then his legs went soft and he was pressed to the ground by Su Shenxing's killing intent. The Sky River Dragon King and his wife left another will in the underground cave of the Dragon Vein. Before they died, they called out to Baihao because they wanted to show you their will. That's right. What Emily found in the underground cave of the Dragon Vein was the other will left by the Sky River Dragon King and his wife. Don't joke. Aoe's veins were bulging, and he forcibly propped himself up against Su Shenxing's killing intent. My parents were killed by Lu Ji before entering the cave. But that's not the case. This time it was Su Shenxing who spoke. He said in a deep voice, Lu Ji did not kill your parents, he only found the hidden danger of the Dragon Vein. If this continues, it may cause an unbearable disaster to humans. In addition, humans are unable to enter the Dragon Vein, so he had no choice but to ask your parents to enter it to fix it. But after that, the Dragon Vein was stimulated and disappeared. The destruction of the Heavenly River is probably because the Heavenly River lost its dragon god and became very unstable, which is likely to cause a flood. Nonsense. Even so, my parents could have left after the Dragon Vein was transferred. Why did it become like this? Aoe said stubbornly. The Dragon Vein cannot be opened from the inside. At that time, Lu Ji once wanted to find the Dragon Vein again and let your parents out. But at that time he was already terminally ill and only had time to leave a few marks that may have the Dragon Vein. Seeing that Su Shenxing seemed to be too lazy to explain, Aoe replied. Later, for some reason, a branch of the fragrant cult found the marks left by Lu Ji and wanted to use the Dragon Vein to bring disaster to the world. In order to stop their actions and save the world, your parents did not take the opportunity to leave the Dragon Vein. Instead, they ate all the spells of that group of people in the Dragon Vein. In the end, they were refined into evil corpses without the knowledge of that group of people. Then why did I receive my parents' will? If it's just to fix the Dragon Vein, there's no need to write that kind of thing. Aoe still did not believe it. Because once he believed Aoe's words, everything he did would become a laughable joke. Because no one had entered the Dragon Vein before that, even your parents did not know how dangerous it was. And in the will they gave you, they definitely did not say that they were killed by Lu Ji, right? Aoe seemed to have lost his spirit all of a sudden and collapsed to the ground. Aoe was right. That will only said that they should treat humans well and that they had a heavy responsibility. It did not say that they would die in the hands of human cultivators. His parents were killed by Lu Ji, and it was only after he heard about it from other dragons that he realized that the letter was actually a will. Seeing this, Su Shenxing also withdrew his killing intent. What kind of joke is this? Aoe looked at the gloomy sky in a daze. In order to protect humans, his parents did not hesitate to enter the Dragon Vein. In the end, they also voluntarily suffered the harm of the cult ritual for humans. They loved humans so deeply, but because of their deaths they took their anger out on humans, which was contrary to their ideals, so much so that they did many irreparable things. After a moment he got up from the muddy water. Then he slowly walked in front of Su Shenxing. Can you please give my father's body to me to dispose of? Su Shenxing looked at Aoe, and the other party also looked at him without the slightest evasion. After a moment Su Shenxing let go of his hand. The dragon zombie, which had obtained freedom, rose into the air as if it wanted to escape here, but Aoe raised his hand and pointed at it, causing it to freeze in midair. If one looked carefully, they would find that the dragon zombie was wrapped in a thin layer of frost. Aoe stared at his father's body for a long time before he slowly said, "My father is dead. This kind of thing really can't be left in the world. It tarnishes my father's reputation." The next moment the dragon zombie turned into flying ash and disappeared. After doing all this, Aoe turned his head again and looked at Su Shinxing. How did you find me? My spirit ghost is good at finding things. You should have been hiding before so we couldn't find your trace. Once you showed up you would definitely be found. Su Shinxing answered casually. Of course there was a lot of bragging, but it didn't stop Aoe from believing these words. I have done a lot of wrong things and hurt a lot of people. I hope I can make up for it. Aoe smiled indifferently, then spat out his dragon pearl. If I break it and mix it into the clouds, all of my divine power and spiritual energy will be mixed in the rain, as compensation to the victims of some benefits. But once the Dragon Ball is broken, don't talk about cultivation, even your spiritual intelligence. Aoe said in shock. Su Shinxing, on the other hand, did not have so many scruples. He took the Dragon Ball and threw it gently. Then he punched it, causing it to fly out of the atmosphere and shatter in the Earth's orbit, forming many meteors. They were pulled by the Earth's gravity and fell back to the Earth. Of course this was what happened later. As expected, Aoye's body was gradually shrinking, but the expression on his face was incomparably carefree. I also like humans. Sai Chiuchiu is gone. Su Wei looked at the empty glass jar in the house with a face of disappointment. When did it run out? Just as she was feeling depressed, the doorbell suddenly rang. The young girl went to the entrance and looked through the peephole. Seeing that the person outside was actually Chintua, she couldn't help but be shocked. She used a small mirror that she always carried with her and tidied up her appearance before opening the door. Chintua looked at the smiling young girl in front of him and awkwardly scratched his face. Someone asked me to bring this to you. As he said that, he took out a plastic box. In the box, an animal that looked like a four-legged snake raised its head and stared at the young girl with round eyes. It didn't even blink. Chapter 498. Ding Yong rode on his flying sword and shuttled through the tall buildings. Behind him was a black shadow. The black shadow was like a giant bat that had opened its wings and was gliding in the dark night. It nimbly shuttled between the buildings and closely followed Ding Yong. This place was close to the edge of Jiangjin. In terms of division, it belonged to the category of the Old City. Su Shinxing's Sakura apartment was located near the junction of the Old City and the New City. As long as he could hold on for a little longer, he would be able to reach the territory of that big boss. Then he would not need to be afraid of the guy behind him. Ding Yong thought to himself. But then he realized that flying into the buildings to avoid the person behind him seemed to be the wrong choice. He had fumbled around for a long time. Finally, he used the copper from Mount Shoshan to forge his first flying sword, Flying Star. It was not known for its agility. When he shuttled between the tall buildings, not only did he fail to widen the distance between him and the guy behind him, he was even closer to him. If they were in a more spacious place, escaping with all his might have been a better choice. But Ding Yong was different from the outstanding cultivators like Qin Xingyan. He had only just stepped into the threshold of being a cultivator. Almost everything he learned was by himself. His cultivation methods were also half-guessed. All the cultivation terms were explained by the Taoist scriptures that he had learned. It was not easy for him to cultivate Zhenqi and become a cultivator. But it was also because of this that Ding Yang's Zhenqi was extremely weak. He could only fly on his flying sword for a few minutes at most. If he ran out of Zhenqi and was caught, he would be in a worse situation. That was why he consciously led the enemy to Su Shinxing, the only place he knew about the senior expert. Chiu. Just as Ding Yong was trying to focus on the intricate flight path ahead of him, dark red light gathered in the mouth of the black shadow behind him. Then with a shrill whistle-like sound, several basketball-sized light balls flew toward Ding Yang's back. What the F***ck? A foreign monster can shoot cannons? Startled, Ding Yong hurriedly pressed down on his flying sword, barely dodging the light ball that was shooting toward his back. However, to his astonishment, those light balls actually decelerated after flying over his head and flew towards him again. F***ck. 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 He's actually following us. There were missiles in front of him and pursuers behind him. It seemed that Ding Yong was about to be attacked from both sides. Thus, in a split second, he gritted his teeth and made a decision. Due to the unreasonable planning of the Old City, some of the high-rise apartments were very close to each other instead of having sufficient distance between each other. The distance between the balconies of two buildings was less than a meter. One could imagine how narrow the alleys were. In addition, the people of the Celestial Empire were good at using space. In the gap between the two buildings, there were a lot of messy things such as clothes, strange billboards, air conditioners. Ding Yong had never flown on his sword in such a narrow place. However, he couldn't care less now. The pursuer behind him had a wingspan of more than 3 meters. It was even more difficult for him to fly in this place. As long as he was careful, he should be able to use the terrain to shake off the pursuer. Even if it was just a little, it didn't matter because he was already very close to his destination. Therefore, Ding Yong dove into the narrow alley. As he expected, the black shadow stopped at the entrance of the alley. Success! He cheered in his heart. However, before he could savor the joy of success, the light balls had caught up with him. Ding Yong couldn't help but curse. Fortunately, although the light balls were fast, their trajectories were easy to predict, so it was not difficult to avoid them. However, at this moment, Ding Yong felt a chill in his heart. During his flight, he saw a pair of siblings about 5 or 6 years old, on a small balcony not far from him. The little boy, who looked slightly older, was standing on a small stool. He was tiptoeing and trying to reach a happy goat balloon wrapped around a clothesline. The little girl, on the other hand, was leaning on the stool for her brother with a worried look on her face. When he noticed this, the sharp whistling sound, which seemed to carry the aura of death, was not far behind him. I can't let those two innocent children get involved. With this thought in mind, Ding Yong twisted his flying sword and sprinkled a handful of small silver beads. They were sword embryos that were originally intended to be refined into sword pills. However, due to the lack of materials and refining methods, they had yet to take shape. Ding Yong calmly watched his sword embryos, which were worth more than $500,000 in raw materials, perish together with the light balls. Then he frowned slightly. One of them was missing. Should he use a talisman? No, there was no time to construct a spell. He didn't even have enough time to think about it. In an instant, Ding Yong raised his flying sword and took a light ball head-on. The powerful impact made him feel as if he had been hit by a train. His whole body fell down involuntarily. Even so, he still smiled. Even though it was a hasty response, he still managed to block all the light balls. However, this was not the end. The sharp whistling sound made his expression change. The black shadow had released a second batch of light balls. Run! He could only use a hoarse voice to shout at the two frightened children. But it was all too late. A light ball went through the little boy's body. His right shoulder and chest were hollowed out. Blood splattered all over the protective glass outside the balcony. In the next moment, the entire balcony was hit by several light balls and collapsed just like that. Cough. After smashing an air conditioner box, a windshield and a few drying racks, Ding Yong finally fell to the ground. Even though he had a relatively strong body after becoming a cultivator, this fall still took away half of his life. But he still gritted his teeth and stood up with the help of the wall. He limped to the pile of dirt formed by the collapse of the balcony. There, a small fair hand was revealed. It was the little girl's hand. Ding Yong dug the soil with his hand, thinking that there might still be hope. But there was only one hand buried there. The little girl's body was still completely smashed. He could only see the blurred flesh. A moment later, the black shadow folded its wings and floated down from the sky like a cloak. When it saw Ding Yong standing there quietly, it could not help but be stunned. Not running anymore? He spoke in half-baked Mandarin. Seeing my own kind die tragically in front of me, I pretended that I did not see it and ran away. I will not be able to get over it for the rest of my life. So that's how it is. The black figure nodded. His voice was still somewhat stiff, but even so, one could still hear the arrogance in his voice. If I had known that killing a few yellow-skinned monkeys would make you stop, I wouldn't have wasted so much effort. Ding Yong tore off the tattered clothes on his body, revealing his muscular body and the cursed seals all over his upper body. Are you going to struggle before your death? The black shadow said disdainfully. Struggle before my death? Ding Yong sneered and put his hands together. The cursed seals on his body bloomed with a bright white light. Like gears, they began to rotate slowly, gradually converting the vitality in his body into spiritual power. I'm going to kill you. Chapter 499. So you were the one who got beaten up instead? Su Shenxing looked at Ding Yong, who was sitting on the sofa with a bloody nose and a swollen face, and sighed helplessly. You can't say that. After all, the gap between us is too big. Ding Yong rubbed his face and replied with a grimace, at least I hurt that guy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to escape unscathed. Being beaten up like this doesn't count as escaping unscathed, right? Su Shenxing complained. Ding Yong could only shrug his shoulders speechlessly. Then he curiously looked at the man on the other side of the sofa, who was also wrapped in bandages like himself and had a miserable look on his face. Brother, were you also attacked by those foreign monsters? So he went over and tried to get close to him. Brother Dragon, who was not mentally prepared, looked embarrassed. To be honest, although there were some stronger monsters in foreign countries, Aoli was a dragon king who had lived for nearly 1,000 years. Unless the big bosses from the mythological era were dug out of their graves, there were not many foreign monsters in this era who could be his opponent. Moreover, even if he was really injured, as long as the Dragon Ball was intact and his origin was not damaged, with the dragon race's recovery ability, he could heal any injury in a short period of time. The reason why these superficial wounds had been on him for more than 5 days was purely because Su Shenxing had mixed the power of the cloud scale into his fist when he attacked. The cloud scale had a considerable suppressive effect on the dragon race, so Aoli had been in this miserable state for more than 5 days. Don't worry about him. That guy asked for it, Su Shenxing said bluntly. Although his tone was not very good, it still helped Aoli out of his predicament. The latter nodded at Su Shenxing. For the dragon race, who had extremely high self-esteem, it was indeed too hurtful to explain to a real mortal why he was bruised and battered. Old Su took the tea made by Aoli and handed it to Ding Yong. Then tell me the details of what happened. Are you going to interfere? Ding Yong took the teacup and his eyes lit up. For him, if a senior expert like Su Shenxing intervened, then everything would be foolproof. You have to tell me the cause and effect of the matter first. Su Shenxing replied unhurriedly. Ding Yong looked at the mysterious mud-like substance in the teacup and thought for a long time. He decided to bite the bullet and swallow it, thinking that it might be some kind of treasure. But before he could carry out his determination, a dozen beetle-like round eyes opened in the pile of mud. Suddenly he could not eat it. Well, actually, this is what happened. He tried to put the cup back on the table with a very natural expression, and then pretended not to care as he recounted his experience. The story started 2 days ago. Before that, Ding Yong had been looking for a suitable place overseas to be used as a blessed enclave for his cultivation. Unfortunately, the spiritual energy overseas was not much denser than in the Chinese Empire. Some of the naturally rich spiritual energy were basically controlled by a family of sorcerers or powerful monsters. Although Ding Yong was a rich man among the mortals, his power and influence were not enough in the supernatural world. Naturally, he could not make those guys spit out the fat meat in their mouths. So, after searching everywhere but to no avail, he could only return to his country in dejection. But this foreign trip was not completely fruitless. He obtained a magical armband from the ancient Vatican. This thing seemed to have a strange power that could keep one's mind clear. For Eastern cultivators, it could greatly reduce the chances of chi deviation. Not everyone could be like Aoi, who could quickly recover from chi deviation. Based on the physique of human cultivators, if a human cultivator's realm was too low, the consequence of chi deviation was basically death. In addition, as long as evil creatures approached, the armband would heat up to alert the wearer. When he took the plane back to the Chinese Empire, he accidentally found a group of sneaky vampires through the armband. The super administrative office of the Chinese Empire was very strict when it came to the entry of supernatural creatures. But that group of vampires used some unknown method to disguise themselves as businessmen who came to the Chinese Empire to invest. They actually passed through the customs openly. So Ding Yong quietly followed them and tried to eavesdrop on their conversation. In the end, he really did get some information. Do you know about the Black Knight satellite? Ding Yong asked when he reached this part of the story. I don't know. Su Shenxing answered very casually. In general conversations, people like Old Su who deserved a beating were the so-called topic terminators. Fortunately, Old Su was not the only one here. Do you mean the mysterious artificial satellite that existed in the Earth's orbit 13,000 years ago and has been mysteriously transmitting mysterious signals? Qin Xingyan, who had been quietly listening to their conversation, suddenly asked. That's right. That satellite has always been regarded as a masterpiece of God in the supernatural world. Some of the older generation of supernatural creatures think that it was used by God to monitor humans and prevent humans from going out of control. Ding Yong continued. In many myths and stories, humans were different from other animals. They were a species created by God or other creatures. Therefore, many supernatural scholars supported the creationism and believed that humans were indeed not the product of natural evolution. Even if the ancestors of humans were really ancient apes, the evolutionary process must have been interfered with by high-level supernatural beings. Because the theory of evolution could not fully explain the mutation-like evolution of humans, there were many unsolved mysteries. For example, human fur was different from most land mammals. Instead, it was more similar to marine mammals. Although there were also hypotheses such as the sea ape theory, so far no fossil evidence had been found. If the sea ape theory was true, then based on the breadth of human species, there should be a lot of such fossils in the world. In addition, although the Black Knight satellite had been observed by humans so far, humans had not been able to successfully capture or interfere with it through physical means. There was no doubt that the Black Knight satellite was definitely not a real artificial object, but a supernatural existence. Therefore, among supernatural biologists who held the creationism view, the idea that the Black Knight satellite was a camera used by God to monitor humans was very popular. What does this have to do with those vampires coming to the Celestial Empire? After listening to Ding Yang's explanation, Su Shenxing asked. Since he suddenly talked about this, it should have something to do with what he said earlier. That's what I want to say. Ding Yang grinned and then said mysteriously, 2 days ago when the Black Knight satellite passed by the sky above the Celestial Empire, it was shot down by a bullet from an unknown weapon. Chapter 500. Although no one seems to know what shot down the Black Knight satellite, or what kind of person or organization did it, the Black Knight satellite is a mysterious treasure that has existed since the mythological era. There is no doubt that it will attract many people's attention. Ding Yang crossed his fingers and supported his chin as he continued. Because it fell in the Celestial Empire, I'm afraid that many foreign supernatural creatures have already sneaked into the Celestial Empire to look for the wreckage of the Black Knight satellite. The vampires I met were one of them. And then you were exposed for eavesdropping on their conversation, so you were hunted down by those guys? Su Shenxing asked. No, if they were only caught eavesdropping, they wouldn't have risked being discovered by the super administration to fight with me. Ding Yang grinned proudly, then took out a small brown cloth bag from his arms. Then he loosened the silk rope tied to the cloth bag and turned the bag upside down. A lot of messy things fell out of the small cloth bag that was originally the size of a palm. After a while, he pulled out a black stone the size of a thumb from the pile of things that looked no different from trash. I stole a piece of the wreckage that they had already found. It was no wonder that the other party wanted to chase after him to the ends of the earth. He risked his life to sneak into the Celestial Empire to steal a little toy, but in the end he didn't even have the time to dispose of the stolen goods before it was taken away by him. If one had to describe it, the nature of this matter was similar to a robber robbing a jewelry store. After a fierce gunfight and a high-speed car chase that didn't require special effects, the robber finally managed to escape to a safer place. In the end, after taking a nap, the jewelry that he snatched with great difficulty was stolen by a local thief. It was almost the same meaning. It would be strange if the robber didn't try his best to chase after the robber. While Su Shenxing's imagination was running wild, he took the Xiaohei stone. He looked around and found that the black stone was not pure black. Instead, it was slightly translucent and had a certain degree of gemstone luster. It felt warm in his hand. Of course, he could not rule out the possibility that it was warmed by the pot of Makai in the small cloth bag. Su Shenxing played with it for a while and felt that it was somewhat familiar. In the end, it was Brother Dragon who looked at it for a few minutes and said dumbfoundedly, This is a fragment of the Dragon Ball. What? Dragon Balls. It is the most precious treasure of our dragon race, and also the source of our dragon race's divine power. Aoli immediately explained. Su Shenxing was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered why he felt a sense of familiarity. 2 days ago he had personally punched something made of this material out of the atmosphere. Wait, 2 days ago? What's wrong? Could it be that you've discovered something? Ding Yang looked at old Su expectantly. The corner of old Sue's mouth twitched. Then he shook his head righteously. At this time Aoli, whose interest had been aroused, came a little closer to observe the fragment of the Dragon Ball. Yes, this is indeed a fragment of the Dragon Ball. It's just that this Dragon Ball seems to have been distorted. Not only has its color become this black, but its nature has also changed. Even if it has been turned into fragments, it did not sublimate into spiritual energy and disappear. Instead, it still maintains its material form and firmly locks the spiritual energy inside. And the amount of spiritual energy inside is somewhat unscientific. Not long after, Aoli, who was an expert in Dragon Balls, asserted. In other words, the legendary Black Knight satellite is actually a supergiant Dragon Ball? Qin Xingyan asked curiously. Ahem, we can't make such a conclusion. Su Xinxing coughed and corrected him. Maybe the vampires made a mistake. This is not the wreckage of the Black Knight satellite at all. It's also possible, but for now it's better to treat the Black Knight satellite as a Dragon Ball. No, it's better to treat it as the wreckage of an ancient dragon. Aoli directly deviated the conclusion to a strange point. However, since those vampires got off at the airport near Jiangjin, it means that the wreckage of the Black Knight satellite fell nearby, right? Su Xinxing saw that the group seemed to be going the wrong way, so he quickly changed the direction and said, in this case, it's actually not difficult to collect the wreckage. Ding Yang was interested as soon as he heard this. He moved closer to Su Xinxing and asked curiously, what do you mean? Su Xinxing, who had a terrible perception ability, naturally did not intend to personally go find the wreckage. However, in terms of finding things, there was indeed an existence in Jiangjin who was very good at this. If she was second, no one would dare to claim to be first. She was naturally the land god Loli, who could oversee the entire land of Jiangjin. The land god Loli might not be able to find those small movements, but if something fell to the ground from outside the atmosphere, even if it was a small piece of wreckage, it would definitely cause a considerable degree of impact. In this way, the land god Loli would naturally notice this matter. Ever since Fat Dragon's Chunibu syndrome was solved 2 days ago, the torrential rain in the country stopped. After asking Chihaya Fukuyama, who had the bloodline of the water god, to help drain the water in the house, the land god Loli and the spirit behind her also left Sakura apartment and returned to her land god realm. She was probably still busy rebuilding her house after the flood. If they went to the abandoned dormitory in the mountains behind Jiangjin, they should be able to find her easily. Of course, old Su had no intention of looking for the land god Loli himself. After all, this was not his responsibility. Compared to looking for meteorites all over the place, what Su Xinxing wanted to do was much simpler and more direct. That was, he wanted to annihilate all the foreign invaders in Jiangjin who did not abide by the rules. Putting everything else aside, Su Xinxing still carried the title of the Guardian of Jiangjin. Although he did not have much subjective initiative, if he encountered these people who caused trouble in his hometown, Su Xinxing would not go easy on them. Brother, can you make a trip to the Earth Shrine with me? When he heard that he wanted to meet the land god, Ding Yang immediately became nervous and looked for help everywhere. This time he directly went to find Aoli. Aoli thought for a moment, then shook his head slightly. Sorry, I still have some things to do, so you can go see the land god yourself. After saying that, he felt that he was being a little unreasonable, so he simply added, actually, you don't have to be so nervous. The land god of Jiangjin, from various aspects is very subtle. That was even scarier. Ding Yang, who hadn't been that nervous at first, stiffened his muscles. Chapter 501. The Amasan clan was one of the few remaining vampires in Europe. Due to the Illuminati's recent actions, the Holy Sword Knights had once again gathered under the orders of the current pope. They had once again begun their search and sweep across most of Europe. All of a sudden, the days of the vampires became very difficult. The Amasan family was not the kind of vampire family that only knew how to drink blood from blood banks and behave themselves. They used their advantage as vampires to play politics and even used the term immortality to trick humans into becoming their blood slaves willingly, allowing them to do whatever they wanted. The new Holy Sword Knights were, in a sense, the most outstanding young warlocks in Europe. They did not play the game of Interstellar, so they naturally set their sights on the Amasan clan, which did not know how to keep a low profile. They had almost succeeded in slaughtering the entire clan. The Immerse clan's elder, who had been scared witless by the Holy Sword Knight's battle prowess, had immediately abandoned the useless blood slaves. He had only brought a few young vampires with decent potential to escape the encirclement, and had been in hiding ever since. It wasn't until the day before yesterday that Immerse's elder learned about the Black Knight satellite from another vampire family he was more familiar with. In the past, Immerse would never have mobilized his entire clan to travel to an ancient country in the east for a piece of groundless news. Only young vampires would believe in stories like finding a lost artifact and becoming a winner in life. Moreover, the Immerse clan was rather fearful of that country. Many countries had been dominated by supernatural creatures in the past, such as the Heian era, when the monsters of Fusang could openly travel in groups at night. The mythological era of other countries and some of the Western countries had even lived under the shadow of one or several supernatural creatures. Only the Eastern country was different. From start to finish, their legends had always promoted the idea that man could conquer the heavens. Almost every dynasty would have a sect formed by humans to clean up the demons. Moreover, unlike the cultists in Europe who cleaned up out of obligation, the Chinese Empire purely treated supernatural creatures as prey. If one had to describe it, the other countries would basically say they're monsters. Hi, quick. Shit, we've been discovered. Run. Only the Celestial Empire would say, vile creature, I've finally found you. Don't run. As expected of a country that could do anything with its food. However, the Immerse clan had suffered a great calamity and was unable to recover. Moreover, the Holy Sword Knights had no intention of letting them go and were still searching for them. If they did not seize this opportunity, it would not be long before this clan that had lasted from the Age of Darkness came to an end. After thinking for a long time, the Immerse clan's elder decided to join the search for the Black Knight satellite. Since so many supernatural creatures had gone to the Celestial Empire, it shouldn't be so unlucky that it would be his clan's clans of the Empire. When he disguised himself as a human and took a plane to the Celestial Empire, the family members he sent out had already found a piece of wreckage. Hats of Twos of the clan S of the clan clans of the clan S. The of the clan clans to the ofs of two twos to buy two of course to his two of two. More than fives of the to do to run to the extent. If they could really collect a few more pieces of remains and figure out how to use them, the Immerse clan's rise would be just around the corner. But not long after this thought surfaced, the remains of the Black Knight satellite's remains, which was actually a fragment of the Dragon Ball, was taken away by a mortal. The Immerse clan's elder was furious. However, it was inconvenient for him to take action himself, so he simply sent out the clan's strongest youngster to chase after the other party and take back the remains. In the end, not only did you let that mortal escape, you even got injured? The elder looked at Creed Immerse, who had returned with his tail between his legs, and asked unhappily. That guy wasn't a mortal. He should be one of the rumored cultivators of this country, Creed replied with a pale face. Well, 90% of the vampires' faces were pale 90% of the time. The magic he used was too strange. He managed to escape if we were not careful. Saying this, Creed threw down a few human corpses. There were 2 small holes in their necks. If they were to be dissected, they would find that there wasn't much blood left in their bodies. But I've already replenished myself with fresh blood. These small wounds will heal very quickly. Creed saw that the elder's expression was getting uglier and uglier. He couldn't help but shrink his neck and whisper, once I've rested enough, I'll be able to find that damned little bug soon. Did anyone see you catch these civilians? The elder asked in a low voice. No, I caught them in dark corners. It just so happens that I can turn them into reanimated corpses and use them as our eyes. Creed smiled fawningly. Also, the taste of the blood of the yellow-skinned monkeys is no different from that of the white people. There are so many of them, I don't think it's a big deal if some of them go missing. When he said this, the eyes of the other vampires in the room also lit up. It had been a long time since they came into contact with fresh blood. Just like how a person who had been eating salted vegetables for half a year would always want to eat something new for a change, these vampires who had had enough of blood packs found it hard to restrain their desire for fresh blood. Moreover, unlike the elder, the oldest vampires in this group of vampires was less than 100 years old. In their view, this eastern country had always been known for its ignorance and backwardness. The Westerners' prejudice against the Celestial Empire and the vampires' disdain for other things made them think completely different from the elders. To them, this country of nearly 1.4 billion people was like a buffet restaurant where they could get whatever they wanted. The elder looked around at the eager expressions of the younger generation and couldn't help but sigh. Even if he stopped them, these guys would still sneak out to hunt humans, hunting permit. So he could only look down at the Rolex gold watch on his wrist. From 6 o'clock until 12 o'clock, whether you're full or not, you have to come back here. Then we'll immediately move to another province in this country to avoid detection. Suddenly the young vampires cheered. However, before they could swarm out of the room, a human with slightly thinning hair suddenly opened the door and blocked the door alone. "Although I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, "I think you don't even need to eat your last meal. It's better to go straight to hell." Chapter 502. Perhaps many people had similar experiences. Usually they were the kind of ice beauty who didn't care for anyone, or the kind of iron-blooded tough guy who wouldn't even frown when scraping bones and treating poison. However, when alone in front of their pet, they would become inexplicably gentle, and even speak in a coquettish tone. "Xiao, I may be home late today. You must eat well at home. Also, don't run out of the glass box, okay?" Sue was one of them. As a big star, she was usually cold and aloof when she was interviewed by the media. After all, she was walking the path of a singer with real strength, not like those in Japan where one's appearance determined everything. She needed to show off her affinity to others. However, when she was facing her pet that was suspected to be a four-legged snake, she would be as gentle as water. Other than the fact that she liked to crawl, this four-legged snake named Xiao was given to her by Chintua. Although Chintua had once said that he had only given it to her on behalf of someone else, Sue had questioned him for a long time, but Chintua had only stuttered and couldn't say who had given it to her. As a result, Sue naturally subconsciously thought that it was Chintua who had given it to her, and that Chintua had only refused to admit it because he was too proud. Naturally, she didn't know that this was because when Chintua was entrusted by Dragon King Aoli, he was frightened by the other party's murderous warning. The four-legged snake named Xiao nodded as if it understood human language. This made Sue show a warm smile. She knew that this should be just a coincidence, but it didn't stop her from feeling very happy. Therefore she picked up Xiao and rubbed it before putting it back into the glass box. Then she picked up the handbag on the chair, hummed her new song that hadn't been released yet, turned off the lights in the room and left the house in a good mood. Suddenly, darkness shrouded the house that could be called a mansion. Only the small electric lamp in the glass box was lit as the only light source. Xiao stayed motionless on the wood in the glass box for a long time, just like a real four-legged snake. After it confirmed that Sue had left, it jumped out of the large glass box that was more than 1 meter high, which was probably used to raise tropical fish. It climbed onto the sofa slowly and then, like a human, it chose the most comfortable position and nestled on the sofa. Then its long tail gently swung like a whip and rolled the TV remote control over. Then Xiao hugged the remote control like a chameleon hugging a branch. The 45-inch digital TV immediately began to play the program under its control. After changing the channel to a channel dedicated to TV dramas, Xiao threw the remote control in her arms to the side. Once again she swung her tail and rolled up an apple from the coffee table. She held the apple in her arms and nibbled on the apple while watching the boring mother-in-law and daughter-in-law ethics drama on the TV with great interest. "You seem to be doing well?" Suddenly Xiao and Xiao. Its triangular head looked at the window alertly, and when it saw who it was, it returned to the lazy appearance of a reptile. Aoli jumped in through the window. The bars of the anti-theft window seemed to be fake and did not hinder his movements at all. Xiao pointed at the fruit plate on the coffee table with its tail, indicating that the other party could eat as much as he wanted. But Aoi had no interest in the fruits of the mortal world. He sat down next to Xiao and then took out a black jade-like fragment from his pocket. It was the Dragon Ball fragment that Ding Yang showed to Su Xinxing in Sakura apartment. That's right, Xiao was the new Sky River Dragon King Aoi who had made a big mistake and had his Dragon Ball destroyed by Su Xinxing to atone for his sins. Perhaps it was because of the special position of the Sky River Dragon King. Even if Aoyi's Dragon Ball was destroyed, his divine power dissipated and he became like this. His intelligence did not disappear because of it. It was just that the vocal cords of a dragon in this state were different from that of a human, and there was no way for him to speak normally. This should be your Dragon Ball fragment. If I'm not wrong, because the Sky River Dragon King's divinity had soaked in the dragon vein for 700 years, the divinity had undergone a strange change. This change also affected your core as a dragon after you inherited the divinity, which is the Dragon Ball. Aoli raised the fragment in his hand. Under normal circumstances, when the Dragon Ball is broken like this, it will most likely directly turn into aura and disappear, but this is different. It firmly locks the aura inside. Do you know what this means? Xiao tilted its head, blinked its amber eyes twice, and made a pure expression of, I don't know anything. It was probably because it had acted cute to Su Wei too many times during this period that it had formed a condition reflex. This made Aoli determined in his heart to restore his cousin as soon as possible. Or cousin, Aoli was not very clear about the term of human interpersonal relationships, to his original appearance. Otherwise, if this continued, even if Aoi could really cultivate again and transform into a human again, it would probably just be another crossdresser in the world. So Aoli put the fragment of the Dragon Ball on the coffee table and continued, as far as I know, your Dragon Ball fragments seem to be scattered in Jiangjin and the surrounding areas. I will collect them as soon as possible. And if it was just to let Aoi regain the ability to transform into a human again, he did not need to collect all the fragments, just a part would be enough. Aoli was still a little confident about this. Because from what Ding Yang said before, there were now many foreign demons and monsters coming here to get a share of the pie. It was not that Brother Dragon was against any foreign demons, but he felt that modern foreign demons were all trash. Unless it was a great demon like Di Feng, even if Karaken came, Aoli could turn him into an octopus ball. This was the confidence of the Dragon King, who had lived through the era of the fall of the gods and had thousands of years of experience. At this time, fireworks suddenly bloomed in the sky in the distance outside the window. Xiao was obviously startled. She stared at the fireworks outside the window with a puzzled expression on her triangular face. The dirty fireworks have already started to bloom. Aoli carefully sensed the life force that had disappeared along with the fireworks, as well as the magic power with a bloody smell that was unique to vampires. He couldn't help but mumble softly, it seems that I have to speed up a little. Chapter 503. The elder of the Emerson family was probably still wondering why the country's supernatural countermeasure agency, which would come knocking on his door so quickly even though there were no witnesses. Of course, as an old antique who had been abandoned by modern society, he obviously didn't know that there were surveillance cameras everywhere in China. When Xiao Jingyi found that the opponent was a little tricky to deal with, he immediately called old Su and brought him out. Don't be afraid, he's alone. All of you attack together. However, the elder of the Emerson family was an old man who had been through a lot. He knew that if he only thought about running away at a time like this, there was an 80% chance that he would be easily defeated by the enemy due to his panic. Moreover, the other party dared to block the door alone. Other than his own strength, he probably had something else to rely on. The elder of the Emerson family tried to imagine the thoughts of the person blocking the door based on his own experiences over the years. First of all, blocking the door itself had a hint of restricting the exit. Normally, when the only exit door was blocked, even people who didn't feel fear would panic because they had lost their escape route. At the same time, they would subconsciously turn their attention to the windows and other places that could be considered as the second exit. People from different factions would always have some strange bickering mentality. Most of the time, compared to their own side achieving their goal, the other side's failure would make them feel happier. Therefore, under these circumstances, when the other party blocked the door, not only would the young people on his side not fight with all their strength, they would even escape through the windows and other places to satisfy their bickering mentality of fooling the other party and making their actions useless. At times like this, as long as the other party placed their main forces near the windows, they could easily achieve their goal of knocking them out one by one. Not only that, even the people who were preparing to fight inside the room would not only slow down when their attention was distracted by the windows and other places, but they would also feel like their hands and feet were tied. This actually increased the success rate of the other party's blocking tactic. However, this blocking tactic had a shocking and fatal flaw. The person in charge of blocking the door had to endure the first wave of attacks from inside the room to establish their deterrence. Only by doing this would the blocking tactic have a chance of success. Otherwise, in the words of this country, it would just be a laughing stock. In other words, as long as he could defeat the person blocking the door, no matter what the enemy's plan was, it would all be for naught. Admittedly, their group had indeed alerted the supernatural countermeasure organization of this country, but that didn't mean that the game was over. After all, it hadn't been too long since Creed Emerson killed the citizens of this country and brought them back as food. Even this country shouldn't have been able to dispatch too much power to this place in such a short time. In other words, as long as he could avoid this wave of attacks, everything else would be easy to deal with. That was why he gave the order, "Let's go together." That was why he gave the order, "Let's swarm up and defeat those who are blocking the door first." Even if the person who was sent to block the door should have a certain level of strength or trump card, and even gave him the confidence to compete with the vampires were supernatural creatures that were far stronger than humans. This time, with so many of them attacking together, even if they couldn't kill the other party on the spot, they could at least break the other party's defense in one wave. Even if the other party was in existence that was much stronger than ordinary vampires, it should at least be able to make him flustered. When the time came, it wouldn't be difficult for him to take the opportunity to escape. As expected, the moment they swarmed forward, the elder saw a surprised expression on the face of the young man blocking the door. But it turned out that he was overthinking things. In fact, as early as a day ago, the Customs Supervision Department of the Celestial Super-Administrative Office had already noticed a large number of supernatural creatures sneaking into the country. At first, the Super-Administrative Office was nervous because of this, thinking that the foreign supernatural forces led by the Illuminati were about to make a move against the Celestial Super-Administrative Office. But it didn't take long for them to realize that these infiltrators had all gathered in Jiangjin and its surrounding areas. Thus, the group of people in the Super-Administrative Office headquarters looked at each other. After a long moment of confusion, the solemn atmosphere of the office on the eve of a great war instantly vanished. The group of bigwigs decided to do what they were supposed to do. Even the supernatural response forces that had begun to be deployed from all over the country were only sent to the provinces and cities around Jiangjin and made into cloth bags to prevent rats from escaping. Not even a single strand of hair was sent to Jiangjin. As the person in charge, Xiao Jingyi was only given the right to access the surveillance footage and the right to requisition the help of civil supernatural enthusiasts at any time. In the words of a certain former person in charge of Jiangjin's super-administrative office who did not want to be named, this group of idiots ran to Jiangjin of all places. Let me tell you, this time, if more than a tenth of them can return to China, I'll admit defeat. This was indeed the case. After learning about the general situation from Ding Yang, Su Xinxing had already made a decision. He did not intend to intervene in the battle between the supernatural creatures to seize the Black Knight satellite wreckage and the Dragon Ball shards, but the premise was that these guys had to do it out of the sight of ordinary people. Once someone tried to cause trouble, Old Su would immediately take action and physically expel the other party from the world. The group of vampires that Ding Yang said caused the deaths of the two children were obviously the best chickens to be slaughtered for monkeys to see, especially after the guy named Creed Emerson recklessly continued to kill a few ordinary people, and Xiao Jingyi discovered his lair through the surveillance footage. When Su Xinxing saw the group of vampires swarming towards him, he was surprised. Naturally, it was not because he was flustered that he could not catch them, but because he was genuinely surprised. It had been a long time since he saw someone who was so fearless and could not wait to die. He was very moved, and then he gave the vampires who were fighting alongside him a magnificent death. They were sent flying into the sky by Su Xinxing's cloud-scaled fist, and finally exploded into fireworks due to the magic in their bodies. The Emerson family elder was shocked by this scene. It was not that there were no people in this world who could beat up vampires, but it was the first time in his long ghost life that he had seen someone who could send a dozen vampires flying into the sky and turn them into fireworks as easily as eating grapes. In just one exchange, the Emerson family elder lost more than half of their strength, which they had painstakingly preserved. "Ah, you monster!" With his heart bleeding, the Emerson family elder spread open his cloak and pounced towards Su Xinxing like a giant bat. Then he was also sent flying into the sky by Su Xinxing's fist and exploded. Even when the entire room was empty, old Su did not realize that there was a Duke-level monster among the vampires who were only Viscount level on average. After doing all this, Su Xinxing took out the phone that had been ringing non-stop and answered Xiao Jingyi's call. Sup. Just now, a vampire broke through the wall and escaped. I was guarding the window on the other side and couldn't stop him in time. Just as Xiao Jingyi finished speaking, Su Xinxing also noticed a human-shaped hole in the wall not far from him. It's okay, he can't escape, Su Xinxing casually assured him. At this time, as long as there were any corpses left, he could use his divine skill, Karma Severance, and kill the escaping vampire as well. Aw. What's wrong? Su Xinxing's sudden shout startled Xiao Jingyi outside. Our protagonist was half kneeling on the ground, doing the OTZ action. The corpses were blown up. I forgot to touch the corpses. No, compared to touching the corpses, catching the escaping vampire is more important, right? Shut up. If you don't touch the corpses, how can you be considered a hero? Isn't your definition of a hero a bit strange? When the dirty fireworks ended, Aoli also planned to leave the room. Take care of yourself. Don't worry, I'll soon refine your hyoid bone and turn you into a human again. After saying that, Aoli jumped out of the window again, and the anti-theft fence outside the window did not work. The four-legged snake Xiao waved its tail, as if it wanted to say something, but in the end, it could not say anything because of its vocal cords. After a while, Xiao seemed to have decided not to care about this matter, and continued to watch the drama. But at this time, the sound of a key being inserted into the door lock came from the entrance. Suddenly it was shocked. F***C, why did my poop picker come back so quickly today? At the same time, it desperately ran back to its glass box with its 4 short legs. When it was lying on the wood pretending to be asleep, Su Wei opened the door and turned on the light. I got it, I didn't take it out. Su Wei rummaged through the sofa and finally found her phone under a cushion. Then she looked at the glass box as if she was relieved. Xiao, are you being obedient? The four-legged snake continued to play dead. Su Wei did not mind. After all, many reptiles like to play dead without moving for a long time. Just when she was about to leave, she glanced at the coffee table and stopped. There was a piece of black translucent jade there. The girl curiously picked up the piece of jade, and suddenly the warm feeling of a living creature startled her. Even though she did not know much, the girl was almost certain that this piece of jade was not ordinary. Did Mr. Chen leave it here? She showed a shy expression. Well, I can't help it. After the dinner is over, I'll return it to him. Then, as if she had found a good reason, she nodded in satisfaction and put the jade into her small handbag. After that, she left the house with a rather happy expression. In the darkness, Xiao opened its eyes. The pair of black eyes that should have blended into the darkness were unusually bright at this moment. Chapter 504. This was Qin Tua's apartment. Qin Tua, who had finally sent the superstar Su Wei home, rubbed his forehead tiredly. Then he raised his head and looked at the sword spirit of the Son of Heaven's sword floating beside him. So why did you ask her to leave this thing behind? Qin Tua waved the black jade in his hand and asked unhappily. Of course it's because it's filled with a troublemaker. Cough, a wonderful aura. The Son of Heaven's sword answered confidently. I say, can't you be quiet for a while? This kind of thing seems to have epic mission item written all over it. I can't even sleep well if I leave it here. Qin Tua pinched the space between his eyebrows and complained. Although he was not a participant in the incident, he was not an idiot. He could clearly feel that the atmosphere on the streets of Jiangjin City was a little strange during this period of time, and there seemed to be a lot of foreigners that he usually did not see. Connecting it to the thing in his hand that was almost engraved with the word troublemaker, he more or less realized that something strange was happening in the dark in the city. Master, you're really too cowardly. If it were up to me, the more you participate in this kind of thing, the stronger you can become, right? The Son of Heaven's sword shouted from the side. Don't you just need to shave all your hair to become stronger? Qin Tua retorted indifferently. Master, where did you learn this kind of twisted logic? Of course it's from the strongest person in Jiangjin. For some reason, when they talked about this topic, the two of them felt a chill run down their backs at the same time. After thinking for a moment, Chintua decided to change the topic to prevent himself from dying from an unknown AoE. So what exactly is this thing? I don't know. The Son of Heaven's sword put its hands on its hips and answered confidently. At this moment, Chintua began to seriously consider whether he could give up his identity as master. But judging from the material, it's somewhat similar to a demon core. Fortunately, the Son of Heaven's sword was not really useless to this extent. In the end, it still gave a subtle answer. Demon core? Chintua frowned. Is it something similar to the magic crystal on the magical beasts in novels? More or less, but demon cores are formed by spiritual energy. Son of Heaven's sword nodded and replied, Master, if you really find it troublesome, why don't you just throw this thing to the strongest person in Jiangjin? For the time being. Chintua considered for a while, but in the end he rejected the suggestion of selling the jade to the Son of Heaven. Instead, he handed the jade to the Son of Heaven. Because you said that this thing might be a Yao core formed by spiritual chi and you're a sword spirit, I thought it was probably something similar, so I gave it a try. I didn't expect it to work, Chintua said casually. I'll praise you. The Son of Heaven's sword said proudly. Praise my ass. Stop playing around and put this thing away. Put it away? Put it away where? The sword spirit girl tilted her head and asked. Dig a hole and bury it. Chintua answered without hesitation. Go find a random flower pot and bury this thing. Why? I'm a godly sword, not a military shovel. The sword spirit girl protested unhappily. If you don't go. Chintua did not waver at all in the face of the sword spirit girl's protest. Pai words. The girl frowned and repeated it like a recorder. I'll stick a tattoo of Xiong Wu on your sword. And it's a light version. It's just digging a hole. I'll go right away. Master, please wait for a moment. You're saying that other than me, there's someone else in Jiangjin who's looking for trouble with those foreign demons? In Sakura's apartment, Su Shinxing, who hadn't enjoyed red braised pork in a long time, couldn't help but widen his eyes when he heard Xiao Jingyi's words. Ah, that's right. Xiao Jingyi hurriedly nodded his head. The key is that the guy's actions are clean and efficient. Almost all of the foreign demons who were attacked were defeated in a single exchange. It's as if they didn't even see who the attacker was. Don't touch that piece of meat. After Su Shinxing saved a piece of pork rib from Xiao Jingyi's chopsticks, he didn't have time to enjoy it before Emily, who was beside him, bit off the meat along with the chopsticks. Looking at the expressionless Emily who was chewing on the meat, bone and chopsticks, Su Shinxing could only put down the chopsticks in his hand and ask Xiao Jingyi, does this have anything to do with me? If you really want to say it, it doesn't. Xiao Jingyi's teeth were also chattering because of Emily's words. Then he continued, but a lot of the demons disguised themselves as foreigners to sneak into Jiangjin. The attackers' actions caused rumors to spread that there's a bandit group targeting foreigners in Jiangjin. This made the police very passive. The bandits are foreigners, right? Su Shinxing scoffed at this. These are all matters that we deal with. Ordinary people in the government don't know about this. Xiao Jingyi said with some hesitation. Since the crooked friend was attacked, isn't it normal to put pressure on the police department to solve the case quickly? After all, he used to work in the police department, so Xiao Jingyi was very familiar with this topic. Maybe it's those foreigners doing the dirty work? Su Shinxing really didn't want to care about this mess. How about I blow them all up in one go? Don't. If you really do that, those foreigners will probably complain. Xiao Jingyi saw that Su Shinxing was getting tired of it, so he didn't continue to urge him. After eating enough, he took the initiative to leave. Anyway, if there's any progress, I'll let you know. Go. Su Shinxing waved his hand to chase him away. Landlord. At this time, Emily stopped chewing and called out in a muffled voice. He turned his head and stared at old Su. What's the matter? Su Shinxing asked curiously. Then Emily sneezed, causing old Su's face to be covered in wood. It's nothing. Emily continued to eat. After a while he said, let's talk. Hey. This was the deepest underground parking lot in Jiangjin. At this time, a group of foreign supernatural creatures had activated a magic barrier to prevent detection and were gathered here for a meeting. The person in charge of the meeting was a middle-aged white male with a manticore body. First of all, I must thank all of you for coming. Although we're all rivals in this competition for the Black Knight, I have something very important to announce to all of you. He stood on the sunroof of a BMW and looked down at the gathered dark creatures. Although only about 40% of the people have received the invitation and responded to my invitation, I believe that some of you have already found the remains of the Black Knight. However, what I want to talk about today is not that, but that in this city, there are people who are treating us as prey and are wantonly hunting us. His words were like a small stone that stirred up 1,000 waves. As soon as he finished speaking, the noise of the crowd filled the entire barrier. Indeed, although the lack of spirit energy caused the supernatural creatures in the world to be unable to recover, this kind of open hunting of supernatural creatures was rarely seen after the Middle Ages. Who would have thought that such a thing would happen in this far eastern country? Of course, these people didn't know that the demons in the country had been living in this kind of deep water and fire since ancient times. Even in the modern era, there were still many cultivators who caught demons to make pills. This is a provocation to everyone here, to us superhumans. Can you tolerate those mortals seeing us as lowly beasts? The middle-aged white male used a rather provocative tone to shout loudly. No, we can't. The demons who were incited by him let out angry voices together. Some of them had probably participated in demonstrations before, and their actions were very well rehearsed. Of course, these demons were all small demons from remote countries. The demons who really had some inheritance more or less knew about the situation in China since ancient times, so they didn't come to this kind of gathering. That's right. How can we be trampled on like this? We need to unite and then give some people in this country of yellow monkeys a heavy blow, and let them know who is the master of this world. When the manticore saw that the effect was so good, he immediately further instigated. Naturally, the miscellaneous demons became even more agitated. This made the manticore feel a little proud in his heart. He had no interest in punishing people who attacked other demons. In fact, he wished that there were fewer people competing with him. The only purpose of holding this gathering was to coerce these idiots who believed in him, so that he could gain a more advantageous position in the next competition. That was all. Now let me register your races and abilities. Then let us surprise this world. As he spoke, he showed a self-proclaimed handsome but rather evil smile. But from beginning to end, he didn't know that there was an eye on the wall watching his every move. Below the abandoned dormitory in the mountains behind Jiangjin, the earth god lowly sighed deeply. It seems that the troublesome matters have increased. Then she shifted her gaze to Ding Yang, who was looking at her expectantly, and said, I have some news that I need you to send out. Chapter 505. Since the manticore dared to gather those stragglers, he naturally had his own trump card. In fact, even though the manticore pretended to be open and honest, he didn't share all the information he had with the other evil creatures. There was still a lot of information that he had in his hands. For example, the hunter actually attacked those who had the fragments of the Black Knight's remains. Even though it wasn't clear how the hunter determined who had the fragments, there was no doubt that those who had the fragments were his targets. And the manticore himself also had a fragment. In other words, he was also the hunter's target. This was because the ambushers were from a vampire family like Immersens. Even though manticores were relatively powerful monsters, they were only slightly stronger than most vampires. It would be difficult for them to win against multiple vampires, let alone 3 of them at once. At the very least, he didn't have the confidence to win against a vampire family with a marquis at the helm. But now that he had gathered more than 40 evil creatures, not only did he have the power to protect himself, he even had the confidence to fight against the Immerse family at their peak. Even the hunter who stole the fragments from the supernatural creatures was definitely not a match for this group. But even if he had the confidence to win, he couldn't be careless. The manticore relied on this vigilance to survive until now. After all, his goal was to control this power and eventually obtain all the fragments of the Black Knight. Now, dealing with the hunter was only the first step of this plan. He needed a beautiful victory to make these disunited evil creatures have a considerable degree of trust in him. From what I know, the hunter seems to be very careful not to expose himself. He never attacked during the day and also doesn't move in places with more humans. This gives us a considerable advantage. At the same time, I guess that the hunter's target should be the fragments. In other words, we can use the fragments as bait to lure them into our trap step by step. As soon as he said that, There was a slight commotion among the evil creatures below. Judging others by their own standards, the manticore naturally knew what they were clamoring about. So he cleared his throat and continued, "Please don't worry, I don't intend to ask you to hand over the fragments you have. Of course, I'm not so kind as to take out my own fragment. But it just so happens that I know the location of a fragment. Let's use that fragment as bait and reward the person who contributed the most. What do you think?" His suggestion immediately gained the support of the evil creatures. The manticore's gaze fell on a vampire in the corner. Creed Emerson, the survivor of the Emerson family who had escaped from Sushinxing. He was also the beginning of everything. Therefore he simply gave Aoli a beating again. At least give me a reason to be beaten up. The Dragon King, who was beaten black and blue by Old Su again, wanted to cry but had no tears. He didn't know how this wound worked, but it couldn't be cured with magic. "I'm just warning you, don't always mess around." Old Su replied calmly. "Wait a minute, I think you're the only one who has no right to say that I'm messing around." Su Shinxing cracked his knuckles. "Oh, it's nothing." Aoli immediately cowered. "In short, it seems that some crooked monsters have gathered recently and are planning to trap you. Don't be so stupid as to walk into it." After finishing what he had to do, Old Su walked to the edge of the rooftop, and then without waiting for Aoli to speak, he jumped down against the howling wind. After that, because someone took a picture of him, it suddenly became popular in Jiangjin as an urban ghost story of someone jumped off a building but couldn't see the corpse. That was another story. Chapter 506. Aoli had caught a cold. To be honest, even Su Shinxing was very surprised. This was the first time he had seen Aoli fall sick in the past few years. Well, even a person who could destroy a star with one strike died of a heart attack. No one said that the Devil King couldn't fall sick, right? All in all, the whole Sakura Apartments was busy because of this. Of course, this was excluding the dog girl and Dehei who didn't know what was going on, as well as Yu Jingjing who knew what was going on but couldn't help much. Su Shinxing didn't have time to care about other things. He only went to remind Brother Dragon after Earth Loli sent Ding Yang to inform him. As for what happened after that, he didn't know. After he finally coaxed Aoli to sleep, he had time to make something to fill his stomach. Although it didn't matter if he didn't eat, Su Shinxing could feel that he was still alive by maintaining normal human physiological behavior. Now little Chiketsu was looking after Aoli. Chihaya Fukuyama was also there to help. After all, when Aoli woke up in a bad mood, Su Shinxing was probably the only one in the whole Sakura Apartments who had two types of divinity at the same time. Asahi Sakurakanji was ordered by Chihaya Fukuyama to go out to buy supplies, mainly food. Unlike other patients who had a poor appetite after catching a cold, Aoli still ate the most food in Sakura Apartments even when he was sick. In fact, if the little guy was allowed to eat to his heart's content, he might be able to eat more than everyone else in Sakura Apartments combined. Qin Xingyan left on her flying sword because she thought that normal cold medicine wouldn't work on Moli. Therefore, she planned to go to Spirit Mountain and Great River to look for medicine to cure Moli's illness. Although Su Shinxing thought that the so-called medicine was probably useless, Su Shinxing didn't stop Qin Xingyan from doing it out of kindness. Until now, Su Shinxing still hadn't figured out why Moli was sick. However, he felt that the most likely reason was the seal. After the third stage was unlocked, the seal on Moli's body had not been activated again. Although Su Shinxing had always thought that it wasn't good to let Moli continue like this, he didn't care too much because nothing had happened. It seemed like it would be better to take Moli to other worlds to find that guy after this matter was over. With this thought in mind, Old Su finished his fried rice in a few mouthfuls. He threw the plate into the sink and sat down on the sofa. Turning on the TV, Su Shinxing found that the news seemed to be broadcasting a natural gas pipeline explosion in a nearby apartment. I remember that the guy called Tua seems to live in this apartment. Is it a coincidence? Because of his relationship with Jasmine, in a sense, Su Shinxing had lost contact with the outside world for 2 days. He also didn't know what the current situation of the battle for the Dragon Balls, which had caused a huge uproar 2 days ago. Thinking of this, Su Shinxing took out his phone and wanted to call Xiao Jingyi, but found that the phone was out of battery. So annoying, so he could only patiently look for a charger. After charging a little and turning on the phone, he found that there were several missed calls, all from Xiao Jingyi. This made old Su feel a little bad. Logically speaking, if Xiao Jingyi couldn't get through to him, he should come directly to him, but he didn't see him for 2 days. So he put away his phone and rushed directly to the police station. When he arrived at the office, he found that the office doors and windows were closed and there was no one inside. After asking a random police officer, Su Xinxing found out that Xiao Jingyi hadn't come to work for 2 days in a row. It seemed that the situation was indeed a bit troublesome. After noticing this, Su Xinxing rushed to Xiao Jingyi's house without stopping. However, Xiao Jingyi's house was guarded by iron guards. Old Su broke in from the balcony with great difficulty, but found that the inside looked like it had been ransacked. It was a mess. Most of the home appliances and furniture had turned into wreckage and a small part of them had disappeared. Could it be that Xiao Jingyi finally couldn't stand these guys anymore, so he killed them all? Su Xinxing said to himself. But then he sighed again. Sure enough, it's still impossible. In addition, the spirit energy in this room was a lot weaker, and there was also the stench of creatures that didn't belong to humans, so something must have happened to Xiao Jingyi. It seems that the previous news wasn't normal either. Thinking of this, Su Xinxing no longer hesitated and went directly to Qin Tua's apartment. Sure enough, he found that the place where the explosion happened was not somewhere else, but Qin Tua's room. Su Xinxing tried to ask the surrounding residents about Qin Tua's whereabouts, but unfortunately, Qin Tua didn't seem to communicate much with the neighbors, so the residents didn't know where Qin Tua moved to. Now that the clues were almost cut off, the situation became a little troublesome. At this time, Emily was still sick in bed and couldn't help. At this time, Su Xinxing, who was at his wit's end, found a blind spot in his thinking. Although the super administrative office was Xiao Jingyi's home ground, and Xiao Jingyi was also the head of the super administrative office in Jiangjin, in fact, there should be another police officer in the super administrative office besides Xiao Jingyi. Fang Xiaoqing. This girl, who usually didn't have much of a presence, might be the breakthrough in the current situation. Therefore, Su Xinxing immediately rushed back to the police station, sneaked into the physics archive room and flipped through Fang Xiaoqing's file. After confirming the address of this FRB, he immediately rushed over there. Fang Xiaoqing's home was a large villa in a wealthy neighborhood. However, Fang Xiaoqing wasn't at home now and there was only a nanny at home. Feeling that he didn't have much time to waste, Su Xinxing simply used negotiation physics to get the information he wanted from the other party. Fang Xiaoqing seemed to have been going to the hospital for the past 2 days. Therefore, after Su Xinxing made her lose her memory physics, he rushed to the hospital again. After rushing back and forth for half a day in Jiangjin, he finally had some results. In a corridor of the hospital, he saw Fang Xiaoqing. Just as Su Xinxing was still hesitating whether to greet the other party suddenly turned into an intensive care unit. Su Xinxing was slightly stunned, then followed in. Fang Xiaoqing, who was sitting by the bed with red eyes, heard someone come in. She just looked up indifferently and lowered her head. Su Xinxing found that the person lying on the bed, unconscious and wrapped in bandages, was one of his few friends in Jiangjin, Xiao Jingyi. Chapter 507. Aoli looked at the suspected abandoned subway station in front of him and frowned slightly. This was a relatively remote and desolate place on the outskirts of Jiangjin. Although there had been a slight deviation in the river course over the years, causing him to be a little further away from Jiangjin, he would still come back from time to time for various reasons. As far as he could remember, such a building did not exist. However, after strengthening his perception through the ritual passed down from generation to generation, he could be sure that this was the place where the last fragment was located. So no matter whether this was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he would explore it. Although the former was equivalent to his home in a sense. When he walked into the underground building, he realized that he was still wrong. Although it looked like a subway station on the outside, it was not the case when he walked in. The underground space was narrow and dim, and it did not feel as empty as a subway station. Not only that, but even the surrounding could only be seen compacted soil and stones. The ground was also bumpy and there was no paved slope. There was no sense of civilization in the entire tunnel. Rather than calling it a subway platform, it would be better to call it an underground city. Although Aoli did not have much interest in Western video games, he still knew some of the game elements, such as the more famous Dungeons and Dragons. If he thought about it carefully, his opponents were indeed the demons from the Western countries. It did not seem strange that they would create such a habitat. Now all that was left was to see what was hidden inside. It really is Dungeons and Dragons. Although the dragons are not the same. Aoli muttered and continued to move forward without fear. It was not that he was overconfident or anything, but for him, other than the famous mythical monsters, the other monsters were really nothing. This could be seen from the fact that he could snatch the Dragon Ball fragments from various forces in a relatively short period of time without any injuries. Just as he was moving forward, the ground under his feet suddenly softened as if he had stepped into a swamp. Immediately afterward, the swamp wrapped around his upper body as if it had a life of its own. Sludge monster. Aoli reached out his hand and blew up half of the sludge monster. However, the remaining sludge monster was still wrapped around his right foot. Almost at the same time, the surrounding walls suddenly opened, and several black shadows attacked him from all directions. "You're courting death." Aoli let out a furious roar. His spiritual energy poured out in torrents and directly destroyed those silhouettes. However, the enemies continued to surround him from the surrounding entrances. Human wave tactics. I know that even my venom, which is effective on gods, can't completely destroy your body, so you must want to buy time to recover, right? Unfortunately, I won't give you this opportunity. Then his face turned cold and he ordered the snake-tailed chicken, "Kill him." The snake-tailed chicken, who had received the order, immediately revealed its sharp claws excitedly and scratched at the immobile Aoli. But the moment its claws were about to touch Aoli, many silk threads invisible to the naked eye seemed to appear. They wrapped around the snake-tailed chicken and then gradually tightened and finally completely twisted it into pieces of meat. The snake-tailed manticore was stunned for a moment, and then said to Aoli in shock and anger, "What did you do?" At the same time, it stretched out its long scorpion tail whip again as if to strangle Aoli. But almost at the next moment, it followed in the footsteps of the snake-tailed chicken, and was twisted into pieces of meat. After that, the remaining fiendish demons also encountered a similar situation. No matter whether they fled, cursed, or begged, they did not receive any response. Just like that, they died abruptly, strangely, and completely in front of Aoli. Even some races with strong vitality and recovery abilities were no exception. What is this? In the end, only Aoli was left in the entire underground city with a confused look. What's going on? It's a killing method that follows the karma line. At the entrance of the underground city, a person spoke loudly. Aoli looked over and found that the person who spoke was actually Su Shinxing. But for some reason he felt that this Su Shinxing in front of him was somewhat out of place. Apart from the clothes on his body, which were rather exotic, it seemed that he also had more hair. He only heard Su Shinxing continue, "I didn't expect that other than me, there's actually someone else who knows this kind of trick." What? Aoli continued to look confused. "Forget it, I don't have much to say to an NPC like you. I have more important things to do." Saying that, Su Shinxing looked at the city area not far away where there were many tall buildings. 10 kilometers away, in Sakura Apartments, Chihaya Fukuyama and Chiketsu, who were in a mess because of Emoli's sudden high fever, didn't notice that the little girl lying on the bed had her eyes tightly closed, as if she was having a nightmare. She had a pained expression as she softly murmured, "Landlord." As if responding to the call from 10 kilometers away, Su Shinxing spoke with a soft but firm voice, "Kill the last demon king." Chapter 508. Chihaya Ne-san. Is Emoli Ne-san getting worse? Chiketsu asked Chihaya Fukuyama worriedly as she looked at Emoli, who was tossing and turning on the bed, mumbling something in an incomprehensible language. That. Chiketsu, you must be tired, right? Do you want to take a rest first? I'll take care of things here. Chihaya Fukuyama's reaction to this was somewhat ambiguous. She naturally knew that Emoli's symptoms had indeed worsened. In fact, Emoli's human form was originally created through magic. Her body temperature was much lower than a human's, and if one were to look for a comparison, it would probably only be slightly warmer than vampires who were close to the undead. However, Emily's condition had changed. Although it was not obvious, her body temperature had already risen to a rather high level. If not for Chihaya Fukuyama secretly using her divine power to lower the room temperature, the room would have already turned into an oven. If she took out the thermometer now, it would probably explode not long after touching Emily's body. Although the current temperature could still be maintained for a period of time, after a while the air above Jasmine would probably distort due to the high temperature, just like the air above the roads during the hottest days of summer. If it was even more extreme, it might even appear like a mirage. At this moment there was the sound of the door opening. Following that, even though the door was closed, one could still hear the dog girl's unique energetic greeting. It seemed that Asahi Sakurakanji had returned. After a short while the maid entered the room as expected. As Chihaya Fukuyama's maid, Sakurakanji naturally noticed that Emily's condition was not normal. Moreover, Chihaya Fukuyama was constantly hinting at her with his eyes. Miss Chiketsu, Chihaya-sama and I are enough to take care of things here. You should go and rest first. Thus she went straight to the point and suggested to Chiketsu. Seeing that Chiketsu seemed to want to refute her, she continued, Mr. Su should be back soon. When he sees how tired you are, he will definitely be distressed. Oh, I know. Since Asahi Sakurakanji had even brought up his most respected elder brother, Chiketsu naturally could not continue to stay here. You must take good care of Emily, okay? Of course, come, let me take you to rest. After Asahi Sakurakanji took Chiketsu away, Chihaya Fukuyama finally heaved a sigh of relief. It was only at this moment that she noticed that the towel on Jasmine's head had already completely evaporated. Hot. When Chihaya Fukuyama's hand touched Emily's head, it made a sizzling sound similar to teppanyaki. If Chihaya Fukuyama was not a deity, her fingers would have been scalded in that instant. The temperature is actually this high, this is not good. The basin, is it in the bathroom? After taking off the towel, Chihaya Fukuyama remembered that she had brought the basin to the bathroom earlier to fill it with water, but forgot to bring it over. Thus she could only take the towel and leave the room, heading to the bathroom. It wasn't until she walked into the bathroom that she suddenly remembered that she also had the bloodline of the water god. Although the water god's incomplete divinity had been mostly devoured by the war god's divinity, if it was a relatively simple ability like creating water, she could still use it. Really, it's completely useless now that I think about it. Since they were already in the bathroom, Chihaya Fukuyama was too lazy to create water, and directly took some water from the tap. At this time there was the sound of the door opening near the entrance. This made Chihaya Fukuyama involuntarily poke her head out to take a look. She found that it was actually Su Shinshing who had returned. It was just that Su Shinshing's clothes were a bit strange now, full of a strange and exotic style. However, after experiencing so many things, Chihaya Fukuyama also knew that Su Shinshing was a special existence. No matter what happened to him, it would not be strange, so she just casually walked out of the bathroom. You're finally back. After drying her hands on her apron, Chihaya Fukuyama greeted Su Shinshing. However, Su Shinshing did not respond to her, but instead walked over step by step. Then Chihaya Fukuyama saw Canine Girl, who had a vigilant expression on her face. What's wrong? This made Chihaya Fukuyama unable to help but ask. He's not little Su. He's someone I don't know. Canine Girl shouted. What are you talking about? Chihaya Fukuyama subconsciously wanted to refute, but for some reason she suddenly felt that the Su Shinshing in front of her did indeed give her a subtle sense of incongruity. Just as she was trying to figure out where this sense of incongruity came from, the other party suddenly rushed forward, pulled out a long sword from behind his back, and slashed at Chihaya Fukuyama. Oh! Chihaya Fukuyama reflexively used her divine power to set up an invisible barrier in front of her. The power of a god was insurmountable for mortals. Just like spitting at the sky would only end up on one's face. Any weapon used by mortals to attack the barrier created by divine power would be ineffective. However, Su Shinshing was clearly not within the range of being ineffective. It was almost a face-to-face confrontation. The other party broke Chihaya Fukuyama's divine power barrier, and forcefully chopped the girl to the ground. If it weren't for the Einherjar's power that allowed the girl to instinctively avoid her vital parts, the sword would have ended her life. Seeing this, Canine Girl also rushed towards the other party, but Su Shinshing threw a backhand punch at her. After knocking over the sofa in the living room, she fell silent. After that, Su Shenxing once again chased after Chihaya Fukuyama. Just as Chihaya Fukuyama was about to accept her fate, a red light blocked her way. However, it was useless. The red light was directly cut in half by Su Shenxing's sword. However, even though it was only a slight delay, Qin Xingyan, who had just arrived, managed to drag Chihaya Fukuyama away with blood spurting out of his mouth, risking his life to repair his flying sword and damaging it. However, before the girl could ask Chihaya what happened, she was nailed to the wall by the remains of the flying sword that Su Shenxing threw out. She screamed and fainted. Perhaps because of Qin Xingyan's interruption, Su Shenxing forgot about Chihaya Fukuyama. He walked slowly through the corridor and finally arrived at Mo Li's room. "Finally found you." Looking at Mo Li, who was lying on the bed with a pained expression but showed no signs of waking up, Su Shenxing slowly raised his sword. The moment the sword was swung down, it was caught by a hand. It was indeed the right decision to rush back immediately after sensing that the sanctuary's protection had been destroyed. Su Shenxing looked coldly at the Su Shenxing in front of him, whose appearance was almost identical to his own, and said in a deep voice, "All right, although I don't know what you are, you should be prepared to be beaten up for messing up my house like this, little brat." Chapter 509. After killing all the evil creatures in Jiangjin through the karma threads on Xiao Jingyi, who was lying in the hospital bed, before Su Shenxing had time to recover from his serious mode, he felt that a strange force had cut a hole in the protection of the Holy Land outside Sakura apartment. Suddenly he felt that something was wrong. After telling Feng Shaoqing a few words, he immediately rushed back to Sakura apartment, only to see the tragic scene. In fact, since the end of the incident 3 years ago, Su Shenxing's mood fluctuations had tended to calm down. There was basically no situation of great sadness or joy. Even most of his usual expressions were revealed according to the atmosphere at that time. Therefore, many people who did not have a deep friendship with Su Shenxing would feel that he was relatively cold. This could not be helped. After all, for various reasons, Su Shenxing's most truthful feelings could no longer be shown. If he showed anger in the true sense, the Earth and even the solar system would collapse because they could not bear or were not qualified to bear this anger. If he showed happiness in the true sense, the will of everything would be distorted and they would begin to indulge in meaningless joy. If he showed sadness in the true sense, then the entire world would be denied and completely turned into nothingness. He was never allowed to show his true feelings. This was also the price he had to bear after obtaining almost invincible power. Back then, after Su Shenxing understood this, he still chose to bring Mo Li back to the fragile world where he was born and raised, and spend the rest of his life here. But at this moment, Su Shenxing was really a little angry. Of course, it was only a fleeting, incomparably illusory wisp of anger. Before this wisp of anger caused harm to the world, Su Shenxing had already suppressed it deep in his heart and restored his previous cold expression. However, the other party obviously did not understand this. "Humph, do you think you can stop me by imitating my appearance and making a golem?" Su Shenxing snorted coldly. With a whoosh, he pulled back his long sword from old Su's hand. It was not until this time that Su Shenxing suddenly realized that the other party's sword was also somewhat similar to Roland Duel. Furthermore, he recognized the sword that he had once wielded. Origin's sacred sword. Elijah, the creation holy sword that was formed from the 12 holy swords, possessed the power to split the heavens and earth and kill both gods and demons. At that time, Su Shenxing broke through the 9,000 lattice worlds and collected the 12 holy swords. He only succeeded in fusing them on the eve of the battle against the Great Devil Realm. At that time, Su Shenxing felt that he would definitely be able to defeat the Devil King and end the sorrow of countless worlds. However, the power of creation was no match for the final Demon King. This holy sword that carried the last hope of all worlds was finally broken by the final Demon King in the War of the Great Devil Realm. Su Shenxing himself also died in that battle. If it was not for the holy sword of Hades, Vandaljo, who resurrected him, his journey of salvation would have ended there. During Su Shenxing's 1,000-year bloody life that was lost along with the Great Devil Realm, the Origin sacred sword, Elijah, that only existed for 3 days, could only be regarded as a fleeting moment. However, It undoubtedly had a rather special meaning among all the weapons that Su Shenxing once wielded. Putting everything else aside, just the fact that it was the predecessor of Su Shenxing's current weapon, final sacred sword Roland Duel, was enough for him to engrave it in his heart. Golem. After a moment of absent-mindedness, Su Shenxing immediately approached the other party again. He needed to figure out what the other party's situation was. If it was from the past, then he could only beat it up and throw it back. If it was from a parallel world, then he would deal with it after beating it up. If it was just an illusion created by someone, then he would kill it directly. Go to hell. Probably due to the same overflowing confidence as when Su Shenxing obtained the Origin Sacred Sword, that Su Shenxing on the opposite side almost did not hesitate to slash at Su Shenxing again. That sword already carried a considerable degree of power, and there was even a transparent flame near the tip of the blade that only appeared when it cut through the world's barrier. From this point alone, except for Su Shenxing and Mo Li, this guy was already invincible in this world. This could not go on. The world where Earth was located was still very fragile. Back then, Su Shenxing did not even dare to casually take out the final sacred sword. Although the destructive power of the Origin Sacred Sword was far less than that of the final sacred sword, they were essentially the same and were not things that a simple world could withstand. Now this was because Su Shenxing on the opposite side had not fully mastered the Origin Sacred Sword. Otherwise, a casual swing of the sword would probably be able to reach the level of the Sword of Truth, the decisive weapon prepared by the rebel prince near the Midserta world. This kind of attack through the law was a unique ability of the Origin Sacred Sword. Even the final sacred sword could not do this. So after understanding this point, Su Shenxing immediately caught the sword with his bare hands and once again caught the other party's attack. Then he slid his hind legs on the floor and his body fell back. Because Su Shenxing on the opposite side did not let go of the hilt of the Origin Sacred Sword, Su Shenxing was forcibly dragged into the extra-dimensional crack on the floor that he slid open. After doing all this, Su Shenxing did not close the crack. Without Mo Li, it was difficult for him to grasp the coordinates of Earth by himself. In addition, the Sanctum's blessing of Sakura apartment, which was a permanent teleportation point, was also cut open. Without this emergency method, Su Shenxing naturally did not dare to casually throw himself into the extra-dimensional crack. Su Shenxing on the opposite side was unsurprisingly angry. If it's really the past me, it's really a pity. Su Shenxing sighed helplessly and reached out again to catch the other party's slash with the Origin Sacred Sword. However, this time he did not catch the sword with his bare hands. Instead, he did it with just 2 fingers. Even with the Origin Sacred Sword, you only have this kind of strength. It seems that I have to be glad that you're not me. What me? Are you trying to use this kind of words to disturb my thoughts? Perhaps seeing that ordinary attacks were ineffective against Su Shenxing, the other party cautiously distanced himself from Su Shenxing in the extra-dimensional world. It seemed that he wanted to use some kind of move to determine the winner in one go. At this moment, Su Shenxing's eyebrows twitched, and an ominous premonition arose in his heart. Wait, could it be? No, don't use that move. Did you notice it? But it's too late. Take this. 3 great brilliant swordsmanship profundity. Sword realm. Limitless end. However, at this moment, Su Shenxing had already swung out an extremely powerful sword attack that was similar to an Iaido slash. I told you not to use such a childish move. Isn't this a move that reminds me of such a shameful memory? In the end, Su Shenxing's fist easily penetrated the other party's swordsmanship, and he directly punched Su Shenxing on the opposite side into a mosaic. In addition, her flying sword 100 herbs was also healing power to the other 2 people in the room. The dog girl was still unconscious because of the strength of the kick. Here. What exactly happened just now? Seeing Su Shenxing come out, Qin Xingyan, who had suffered domestic violence, first trembled. When old Su Shenxing came back, she had already fainted, so she did not know that the person who had injured her was another Su Shenxing. However, seeing that Su Shenxing did not seem to have Shirliji, she mustered up the courage to ask. If I'm not wrong, Emily must have had a nightmare. Su Shenxing scratched his head and answered with an awkward expression. No, isn't that strange too? Why would Miss Emily dream of such a senior in her nightmares? Senior, were you that violent in the past? How could that be? Su Shenxing said with a hollow laugh. That's what I meant. Qin Xingyan showed a relieved expression. If the degree of violence was multiplied by 3 and squared, it would be the degree of violence that Emily saw in the past. Isn't that even worse? While the two were still talking, the ground suddenly trembled slightly. Su Shenxing thought that the Balrog he had stuffed under Sakura apartment wanted to escape because the protection of the Holy Land had disappeared. So he gently stomped his foot, but the tremor did not disappear. Only then did he feel that something was wrong and looked out the window. Then he saw something that looked like Godzilla on the city's horizon in the distance. I must still be in a dream, right? Qin Xingyan, who also felt that something was wrong, looked in that direction and naturally saw the huge monster that usually only appeared in Ultraman. You're not the one in the dream. Su Shenxing smacked his lips. He recognized that monster. It was a relatively common monster in the Great Devil Realm. Its status was probably similar to the little white rabbits on Earth. It was a giant monster that was purely bred to eat meat, a Kerasin dragon. Although in the Great Devil Realm, this kind of monster that was useless except for its size was basically no threat other than being a good meal. It could not even defeat the 99-headed demonic dragon that was at the bottom of the food chain in the Great Devil Realm. But if it was placed on Earth, it would be a bit troublesome. For the people on Earth, this thing might be even more difficult to deal with than Godzilla. Unless they had a weapon on the level of the Centaurus space battleship's main cannon, there was almost no way to kill it in one shot. Su Shenxing opened the window, touched his pocket, took out a coin from it and flicked it gently. Suddenly, an orange-yellow beam of light flew out from his fingertips, and finally, with an unreasonable phenomenon that broke through the constants of physics, it blasted the monster's head and stopped its destructive behavior. Su Shenxing heaved a sigh of relief. However, he understood that the longer this situation was delayed, the more troublesome it would be. The really troublesome guys in the Great Devil Realm had not appeared yet. Before he could relax for long, a rough crack appeared in the sky as if a piece of it had been torn off. A huge eyeball appeared in the crack. The gaze revealed by the eyeball was full of malice and madness, causing almost everyone who looked at it to fall into hysterical madness. That was the eye of the King of Arrogance, a private in the Great Devil Realm. A considerable number of them were sent to carry out colonial wars. In other words, they were sent to part of the Lattice world as the Demon King's race. If the Kraken Dragon could still fight a few rounds with the other party just now, then the enemy this time was purely to the extent of being crushed. Many of the 9,000 Lattice worlds' technological levels were higher than Earth's and belonged to the near future. But in front of this monster, there was no way to fight back. Su Shenxing immediately tore off the aluminum alloy window edge, twisted it into a sharp and thin spiral and then threw it at the eye. Almost in the next moment, the terrifying giant eye exploded directly. Countless stinky blood poured like heavy rain on the buildings in the city center, and suddenly the city of Jiangjin was dyed red. We can't continue like this, Su Shenxing said in a deep voice. Although the demonic creatures were no match for him, once the number of demonic creatures increased, even if he could eliminate all of them in the end, the entire Earth would be destroyed beyond recognition. Senior, what should we do now? Qin Xingyan asked worriedly. The current situation was completely beyond the scope of her ability and knowledge. It's useless to eliminate these almost infinite monsters. The only way is to block them from the source. The source? The girl blinked. Su Shenxing was silent for a moment before he continued. Yes, let's enter Mo Li's dream. There's no other way. Chapter 511. Enter a dream? Senior, do you have such an ability? Qin Xingyan's face was full of surprise. She seemed to find it inconceivable that Su Shenxing could use other powers other than physical and protective powers. Nonsense, of course I don't. Su Shenxing had a matter-of-fact look on his face. Although he had entered the Earth Loli's dream before and even changed reality because of it, that was with Mo Li's ability. Unfortunately, Su Shenxing himself couldn't do this. But don't cultivators like you have spells like dream teleportation? Can't you use that to enter? About that. Although dream teleportation spells aren't difficult, aren't all my spells ineffective against Senior and Mo Li? Qin Xingyan sighed and reminded him. Then she looked out the window again and saw that the shadow of a huge creature was gradually becoming clearer not far away. And even if it's effective, will Jiangjin really be alright while we're away? Putting everything else aside, wouldn't Jiangjin be completely destroyed if one or two more Godzilla-like creatures like the one just now appeared? You don't have to worry about that. Su Shenxing took out an object that looked like a glass bead from his pocket. When the Croconsaurus appeared just now, I had the guy inside use the sword of truth to remove the current Earth from the flow of time of this world. That is to say, the current Earth is now independent of all timelines. As long as we take care of things and put the Earth back on the original flow of time, there won't be a problem. To put it simply, it was more or less the feeling of eat my sword of truth and let's just pretend that nothing happened. Senior, why do I feel that what you're talking about is completely beyond the level of cultivators like us? Well, that's true. After all, that glass bead was originally a broken world called Loren Visa. For cultivators who were currently limited to the solar system, it was indeed a little too far away. And although Loren Visa was a broken world that was in imminent danger and could collapse at any time in the past, their level of magic and technology was quite high. Moreover, their civilization was not limited to the level of a planet or a galaxy, but a world-class civilization in the true sense. So much so that they even launched a rebellion against the Midserta world that belonged to the Space Administration. Although in the end it was settled by Su Shenxing alone, Loren Visa, which had been turned into a lattice world, was not destroyed, just like the lattice worlds that were displayed in the cabinet by the Demon King. Not only that, but in a sense, after becoming a lattice world, the defects of the Loren Visa world itself had been suppressed and slowed down to a certain extent. The sense of crisis that seemed to be hanging over their heads like the sword of Damocles had also been temporarily lifted. But Qin Xingyan did not interrupt him, but continued to listen quietly to his story. Ordinary spells can't affect Mo Li and me, but in fact there is an exception. When Su Shenxing said this, Qin Xingyan showed a look of understanding. Senior, you mean that Mo Li's spell can affect you, right? But now Mo Li. Well, although that's the case, do you think Mo Li's spell is different from ordinary spells? Su Shenxing asked rhetorically. I'm not sure what type of spell Miss Mo Li uses. Qin Xingyan looked troubled, but it should be a very advanced type, right? Wrong. Indeed, Mo Li's spell, or magic, can be said to be terrifying, but in fact the spell structure she uses is very simple, the only difference is magic. Su Shenxing grinned and revealed the mystery. For example, everyone knows that the Z-line between 2 points is the shortest, but if you can use a simple and crude method to teleport, you don't need to look for a straight line at all. Mo Li is the same, even if it's just a little bit of magic, the simplest spell can surpass the carefully constructed spells of others. So naturally she doesn't need to spend any effort to construct it. Oh, I'm a bit off topic, but there's only one thing I want to say. What can affect Mo Li and me is not Mo Li's spell, but Mo Li's magic. Su Shenxing's expression became slightly more serious. So whether it's entering or leaving a dream, I'll provide you with a certain amount of Mo Li's magic. Use that and let us enter her dream world. Chapter 5:12. She only regained 30% of her magic power and she had this kind of nightmare. Who is Miss Mo Li? Qin Xingyan asked curiously. Simply put, Su Shenxing organized his words before answering, she's the crystallization of the world. Seeing that Su Shenxing didn't seem to want to continue explaining, Qin Xingyan just nodded slightly, and then showed a gentle smile. Is that so? I understand. Then what should I do next? Senior, please tell me. First of all, the transfer of magic power. To be honest, passing Mo Li's magic power to you is risky. Even if I can prevent you from dying through the blessing of dying breath, I'm afraid you'll suffer more terrible pain than death. Su Shenxing warned with a rare serious face. But senior, this is the only way right now, right? Qin Xingyan replied with a wry smile. Well, if you really don't want to, I can try to use a more physical method to invade Mo Li's dream. But the success rate of that method isn't high, right? The girl hit the nail on the head. According to my understanding of Senior, if it's a problem that you can solve by relying on Senior, you'd usually rather work harder than involve us in those things. It's as if you're subconsciously avoiding having a deeper relationship with us. In other words, this time senior, after you understood the reason, you subconsciously wanted to use my ability. Most likely it's because it's difficult to rely solely on the physical method you mentioned, right? Su Shinxing's expression was a little awkward. That was indeed the case. Although it was indeed possible to enter Jasmine's dreamscape through entering a dream, physics, the probability of that happening could be said to be minuscule. Even Su Shinxing would need a considerable amount of time to practice in order to accurately enter the dreamscape, just like how he had spent a full 10 years in another world to learn how to cut open the correct flow of time and send his disciple back to this time. Now that the earth had been removed from the flow of time because of the Sword of Truth, no matter how long one practiced here, it would not affect the time in the outside world. However, Mo Li himself had transcended the concept of time, and because of Su Shinxing's existence, Sakura Apartment itself existed independently of the outside world. This was why the people in Sakura Apartment could still move normally when the time in the outside world had stopped. I'm very happy. I'm so happy that Senior can ask me for help at this time without hesitation that I'm so happy that I'm about to cry. Qin Xingyan put his hands on his chest and said with a soft expression, I've been studying and practicing hard, but no matter how hard I try, I can't keep up with Senior's pace. When I realized how big the gap between us was, for the first time in my life I had this kind of worry. If one day Senior goes to a place that I can't reach, if one day Senior doesn't need me to follow behind him, what should I do? So even if it's extremely painful, it doesn't matter. If I can help you, please take my body, my soul, and everything I have. I always feel so heavy. Su Shinxing scratched the back of his head and complained. Yeah. Is that so? Qin Xingyan also giggled, but there was still some sadness in his eyes. Just when she was about to say something to gloss over her confession and make the atmosphere a little more relaxed, Su Shinxing took a step forward, held her in his arms and then kissed her on the lips. Ah, intimately licking, I want it too. Canine girl, who had just woken up, saw the two people kissing and suddenly became excited. She shouted and wanted to jump on them. But before she could do anything, she was pressed to the ground by Chihaya Fukuyama, who was trying to reduce her presence, and said, Idiot, look at the atmosphere. Since she had already spoken, it meant that Chihaya Fukuyama couldn't continue to be an ostrich. In fact, she didn't want to be an ostrich in the beginning. It was purely because the sudden appearance of Croconsaurus and the King of Arrogance outside the window was too shocking, so she was so scared that she lost the best opportunity to speak. If you want to flirt, can you go to the room? If you do it here. I don't think it's a good idea. She tried to cover the struggling dog girl's eyes as she spoke to Su Shinxing, who was still kissing each other. It was only then that Su Shinxing let go of his hand and distanced himself from Qin Xingyan, who had become dizzy. Because they kissed for a long time, the kiss that was originally just lips touching turned into a deep French kiss. When Su Shinxing raised his face and his lips finally parted from Qin Xingyan, there were even sparkling droplets of saliva at the corners of their mouths. Then Su Shinxing said with a dignified expression, No, I'm not flirting. Chihaya Fukuyama responded with an expression that said, What is this scumbag saying? Is he trying to shirk responsibility after kissing me? I know you don't believe me, but because I don't know how to use magic, I can only transfer my magic through a more traditional method, such as mucosal contact. Is Mo Li's magic AIDS? Chihaya Fukuyama complained. AIDS is body fluid exchange, isn't it? Su Shinxing was not embarrassed at all. Because he was too open and above board, it deepened Chihaya Fukuyama's impression of him as a scumbag. In addition, although she was born in Fusang where the atmosphere was more open, Qianzhao seemed to be very unfamiliar with the topic of sex. After saying a few words to Su Shinxing, she was already blushing like something was wrong. Compared to this, Xingyan, how does your body feel? Su Shinxing turned his attention back to Qin Xingyan. My lips are numb, they feel warm and comfortable. Qin Xingyan was called by Su Shinxing and immediately came back to her senses. However, from her answer, it was obvious that she was still confused. I don't know why, but I feel like Senpai is very familiar with it. Suddenly, Su Shinxing felt that the scumbag from Chihaya Fukuyama was staring at him with a piercing gaze. I'm asking, how does it feel to transfer my magic into your body? Su Shinxing coughed and asked in a serious tone. Qin Xingyan seemed to have finally realized what she had said. Her face turned even redder than Chihaya Fukuyama's, and her voice became as soft as a mosquito's. If it wasn't for Su Shenxing's good hearing, he probably wouldn't have heard what she said. It doesn't feel like anything special. However, before Qin Xingyan could finish her sentence, she felt as if she had been hit on the head by an invisible sledgehammer. She stumbled for no reason. Then the skin on her back seemed to have cracked open due to the excessive pressure in her body, and a large amount of blood spurted out like bright red wings. Chapter 513. Xingyan. Even Su Shenxing was shocked. He didn't expect the side effects of the magical energy entering the girl's body to be so severe. I'm fine. When the girl fell forward, she subconsciously wanted to grab onto Su Shenxing's hand to maintain her balance. But just as she was about to touch Su Shenxing, she was afraid that her cracked and bloodied hand would dirty Su Shenxing's clothes. So she pulled her hand back and staggered a few times before she managed to stabilize herself. How does this look like nothing's wrong? Su Shenxing ignored the girl's stubbornness and supported her. Senpai, now is not the time to be concerned about me. Aren't you going to save Miss Emily? But, then please take me to Miss Emily's room. The girl leaned into Su Shenxing's arms and gently but firmly interrupted Su Shenxing's hesitation. She said in a weak but firm voice, please believe me, I will definitely help. Su Shenxing was stunned for a moment before his expression softened. He carried the girl in his arms and walked towards the room. Hey, wait a minute. Chihaya Fukuyama shouted from behind, she's about to die. Is it really okay for you to let her help you? It's okay. You bastard, are you actually such a cold-blooded bastard? Chihaya Fukuyama was stunned by Su Shenxing's indifferent voice and spoke with an expression of disbelief. But Su Shenxing's following words directly dispelled Chihaya Fukuyama's doubts. If Xingyan dies because of this, I will bring her back even if it means tearing the underworld apart. Su Shenxing paused for a moment before replying, a mere world has no right to steal someone from me. After speaking, he walked into Mo Li's room. Although I don't know what's going on, I still want to go in. The dog girl, who had no idea what was going on, was about to rush into the room excitedly, but was pulled back by Chihaya Fukuyama. Wait a minute. The situation is very dangerous right now, I need your strength. Really? Really? That's right, so guard the door. Ahem, I'll leave the living room to you. Understood. After being convinced by Chihaya Fukuyama, the dog girl was filled with a sense of duty as she dragged Big White around the living room. After making sure that the girl wouldn't run around and cause trouble, Chihaya Fukuyama's room followed Su's footsteps. Inside the room, Su Shenxing's room, and Qin Xingyan was kneeling by the bed. He was drawing a huge formations spell. A spell formations with his blood, his. But from the way the girl looked like she was about to faint at any moment, it seemed like she wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. This made Chihaya Fukuyama look at Su Shenxing with some uneasiness, but old Su's face was still expressionless. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. It's done. At this moment, Qin Xingyan's powerless voice sounded. He had finally finished drawing the last stroke of the spell formation and left his bloodied handprint in the center of the formation. Senpai, please stand at the head of the bed, I'll send you into your dream. Sorry to trouble you. Su Shenxing also opened his cloud scale and accepted the girl's magical effect. A white light flashed and Su Shenxing disappeared from where he stood. After successfully sending Su Shenxing into his dream, Qin Xingyan spat out a mouthful of black stuff mixed with blood. It was unknown whether it was a blood clot or a piece of his internal organs. His eyes became blurry. Hey, are you really okay? Chihaya Fukuyama couldn't help but ask. I'm fine. Qin Xingyan's forehead was sweating and the temperature of his skin rose. Miss Chihaya, I have a request. What is it? Chihaya Fukuyama was a little curious. This was the first time Qin Xingyan had said something like this to her. Although Su Shenxing probably didn't know, Qin Xingyan had always been a bit of a loner in Sakura's apartment. Although she almost never refused anyone's request for help, she always solved her own problems and would not ask for help unless it was absolutely necessary. Therefore, when Chihaya Fukuyama suddenly heard that Qin Xingyan had something to ask her for help, it was a bit of a novelty. Senpai, it must be very troublesome to do things alone in that kind of place. If it's okay, can I ask for your help? Are you still clear-headed? If you think it's dangerous, that's not what I meant. Chihaya Fukuyama rudely interrupted Qin Xingyan. I know it's dangerous, but do you know your current situation? Your face is so pale right now. Compared to a dead person, it's just that you have one more breath. Under such circumstances, if you send me into the dream world again, can you really survive? Chihaya Fukuyama knew that she was angry, but she didn't know what she was angry about. Chihaya Fukuyama felt that she could understand Qin Xingyan's feelings of wanting to repay Su Shenxing. However, this method of repayment was like humiliating oneself, which made Chihaya Fukuyama very uncomfortable. I'm sorry, I was too abrupt. Qin Xingyan supported himself against the wall and tried to stand up. Then he activated the formation on the wall again. Since you don't want to, I'll go by myself. You're such a big idiot. Chihaya Fukuyama shouted angrily. Even if you go with him, how can you help him? I don't know. Qin Xingyan answered matter-of-factly, but I'll do my best to help. Looking at the smile on Qin Xingyan's face, Chihaya Fukuyama understood at this moment. For an individual like Qin Xingyan, the important thing was not whether he could help Su Shenxing, but whether he could do his best to help him. This was a pure feeling of giving everything to that guy who was neither handsome nor humorous as the foundation of her existence. I understand, I'll go and help. After understanding this, Chihaya Fukuyama sighed heavily. So you just rest here. Maybe we'll need you to pull us out when the time comes. Thank you, please. When the white light that filled the room disappeared for the second time, Qin Xingyan looked down at his palm that was full of cracks and bleeding. He said to himself helplessly, sure enough, this is all I can do to help Senior. I'm really not satisfied. Inside the Bailu Temple. Like most places on Earth, because of the Sword of Truth, time here was in a state of stagnation. Because everyone was in a standstill, no one noticed that the wooden tablet with the words Qin Xingyan on it was gradually decaying. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.